Deep within his heart, the resolve he had carried since childhood burned bright as he read through tales of brave adventurers using sacred weapons to shield humanity from ferocious beasts and demons, revered across generations as legendary heroes. Since early childhood, he had spent countless hours engrossed in those heroic chronicles, until a sudden, forceful grab snatched the beloved book right out of his small hands. Older kids surrounded him with cruel laughter, mocking his quiet reading habit and deriding his grand ambition, insisting that a weakling like him who lacked a sacred crystal could never hope to become an adventurer, let alone a hero. He could only offer a faint, self-deprecating chuckle as he reflected on that exact moment, realizing that their harsh ridicule was the precise trigger that transformed his simple admiration into an unshakable desire to actually become a hero. That was when a familiar girl courageously stepped into the fray, her voice ringing out with fierce determination as she confronted the bullies and demanded they return his book immediately. Whispering her name softly, he felt the vivid memory begin to dissolve as consciousness slowly drifted back to him. Opening his eyes, he found her leaning closely over him with a bright, welcoming gaze, casually greeting him with a cheerful good morning as he woke. She explained that she had called out from his window repeatedly without an answer, forcing her to come inside, while he sat up in bed, flustered and demanding to know why she had snuck into his bedroom. Urging him to get ready, she enthusiastically reminded him that today was the long-awaited blessing ceremony, mentioning that his own mother had entrusted her with waking him up, a revelation that left him groaning in exasperation. As he stepped outside clutching his favorite book, he reflected on the significance of the day when 12-year-olds were granted a sacred weapon from the gods, the very first step toward becoming the adventurer he had dreamed of being since early childhood. Before they departed, his mother requested that she look after him during the ceremony, a responsibility she eagerly accepted, boasting that she would fulfill her role as his reliable elder sister figure. Upon arriving at the bustling church surrounded by gathering crowds, her face lit up with childlike delight at the festive atmosphere, leaving him to quietly observe her overflowing enthusiasm. As they walked toward the grand entrance, she teased him for staying up all night reading books despite waiting his entire life for this single, unrepeatable ceremony, while he secretly fretted over the possibility of receiving a useless or strange weapon. Continuing her playful jabs, she brought up how easily the local boys picked on him, expressing hope that the ceremony might fix his timid nature, a comment that left him utterly speechless and unable to defend himself. Listening to other youngsters pass by, his self-doubt resurfaced as he pondered whether he should abandon his dreams for a simple fruit stall, but she firmly reminded him that securing a weapon above rank C would guarantee his path to becoming an adventurer. Observing the crowd further, he realized that many attendees were not there to participate, but simply to admire the heroes, overhearing local girls declare that they would far rather be protected by a brave adventurer than become one themselves. Turning his gaze toward the back of the plaza, he spotted several unfamiliar, well-equipped figures standing among the crowd, instantly recognizing the unmistakable presence of true, experienced adventurers. He clutched his beloved book tightly against his chest, explaining to his companion that an official invitation from an established adventurer could bypass the arduous entry exams entirely. She paused, turning toward him with a gentle gaze to ask if he still remembered the solemn promise they had made to one another long ago. Memories resurfaced of their shared childhood vow. He yearned to match the glorious deeds of the heroes from his storybooks, while she sought to shield the innocent from demonic beasts. Under the open skies, that sacred pact had forged their shared destiny long before arriving at the church grounds. Her bright smile in the present mirrored the enthusiasm of that day, silently reaffirming that their shared journey was just beginning. Nearby, the excited chatter of townsfolk suddenly broke the moment, as voices gossiped loudly about a legendary hero rumored to be walking among them. As the crowd murmured about renowned adventurers, he noted that the blessing ceremony was imminent, right as several acquaintances called out to invite her over. With a cheerful promise to return shortly, she hurried off toward her group of friends, leaving him alone to ponder the stark contrast between her warm popularity and his own quiet isolation. As the youths gathered for the upcoming event, Helio sneered mockingly at Rust, bumping into him and making fun of his small size. He questioned whether someone so weak truly intended to participate in the ceremony, warning him that a helpless boy wouldn't receive a decent sacred weapon. He then snatched the hero storybook directly out of Rust's hands, laughing condescendingly. He mocked him for clinging to children's fairy tales at 12 years old, demanding to know how he ever expected to grow strong enough to wield a real sacred weapon. Before he could torment Rust any further, Ruby stepped boldly between them, her eyes blazing with indignation as she demanded that he give the book back immediately. Clicking his tongue in annoyance at her interference, he glared back at her, while Rust looked on from behind, touched yet pained by his own inability to stand up for himself. Continuing his harsh taunts, he scoffed at Rust, calling him a weakling who had spent his entire life being protected by a girl and warning him not to embarrass their whole generation. With a final dismissive remark, he dropped the book onto the dirt at their feet and walked off, leaving Rust standing in silence, barely managing a soft, resigned response. Stepping forward, she retrieved the book and handed it back to Rust with a bright, encouraging smile, expressing her firm belief that he would grow up to be an incredible hero, unaware of how deeply her words stirred his heart. Moments later inside the Grand Cathedral, the high priest stood before the glowing altar and announced to the assembled crowd that the blessing ceremony was officially beginning, inviting all candidates to step forward. Once a year, when the sacred light passes over the world, mortals are granted the rare chance to commune directly with God Hephaestus. As Ruby excitedly alerted Rust that the ritual was about to begin, an eager boy stepped up to take the first turn. Kneeling before the altar beneath the radiant glow streaming through the stained glass window, the boy closed his eyes as the priest instructed him to offer his heart in prayer. In response to his silent plea, a sudden, blinding flash erupted across the sanctuary, forcing Rust and the gathered crowd to shield their eyes from the dazzling glare. As the brilliant illumination began to fade, he lowered his hand, staring up at the grand altar in sheer wonder as the miracle of the blessing ceremony unfolded before him. At the center of the sanctuary, a majestic broadaxe materialized in a shower of light, a C-rank sacred weapon known as the gigantic steel axe. The room erupted into thunderous cheers as the boy proudly held the massive weapon aloft. Observing the boy's success, the priest explained that upon receiving a sacred weapon, equipping it immediately grants the wielder full knowledge of its inherent traits and abilities, prompting excited chatter among the onlookers. Amidst the rising excitement of the crowd, Helio narrowed his eyes, quietly evaluating the strength of the newly summoned weapon with a critical gaze. Unbothered by his distant scrutiny, a young girl eagerly stepped forward, raising her hand high to volunteer as the next candidate before hastening to kneel at the altar. Her prayers were answered instantly as a swift blade materialized in her grip, the Gale Dagger, another C-rank weapon, sparking further awe and optimism throughout the hall. Watching the extraordinary display, Rust realized how remarkably lucky this year's ceremony was, as receiving 2 C-rank weapons in a row was exceedingly rare, filling his heart with thrilling anticipation for his turn. He watched in amazement as 2 C-rank weapons were summoned in a row, a remarkable occurrence given that the standard average weapon rank ranged from F up to A, with D being the norm. Determined to break free from his meek and timid past, the boy resolved to obtain a powerful divine weapon, while his companion cheerfully voiced her own desire for a great weapon as they moved toward the ceremony area. Their momentum was halted when Helio stepped forward, drawing the formidable long spear of lightning, a coveted B-rank weapon, which sent waves of excitement and praise through the gathering crowd. Recognizing his exceptional talent, scout representatives from prominent adventurer guilds immediately approached him, eager to recruit the young prodigy into their ranks. A smug, triumphant grin spread across his face as he reveled in the sudden flood of praise and offers. Watching the scene unfold, Rust felt a surge of rivalry and frustration, swearing under his breath that he would manifest a weapon capable of rivaling Helio's success. Moments later, Ruby stepped up to the divine pedestal, bowing respectfully as she introduced herself to the statue to receive her blessing. As she offered her silent prayers, her young companion looked at her back, wondering if she was truly aware of the deep feelings he held for her. His thoughts drifted back to his childhood, recalling the endless hours he spent sitting alone with his books while the other village children played together in the distance. He remembered how the neighborhood bullies used to tease his dreams of becoming a hero, and how Ruby had bravely stepped in to defend him, boldly declaring her total confidence in his future greatness. She had always stepped in to shield him from trouble, fiercely standing her ground against Helio whenever he tried to bully the weeping boy. Gazing up into the open sky back then, her gentle voice had carried a somber truth, reminding him that she couldn't protect him forever. Turning to him with a warm, encouraging smile, she urged him to grow stronger so he could become a truly magnificent hero, earning a tearful, resolute nod from the young boy. Returning to the present at the sacred altar, he watches in absolute awe as brilliant light engulfs her, reaffirming the deep vow in his heart to become just as strong as she is. Inside the grand cathedral, Ruby marveled at the stunning weapon on display, an unbelievable A-rank sacred weapon known as the Large Sword of the Flame Dragon. The crowd erupted into loud cheers as she gushed over how impressive it was up close. As she beamed with excitement, the young boy confessed that while he admired the legendary heroes from his storybooks, he looked up to her just as much. Before he could say more, eager onlookers and fellow hopefuls rushed forward, offering words of encouragement and inviting him to join their adventuring parties. When his name was finally called out across the hall, he stepped forward toward the altar, softly thanking her before offering a silent prayer to God for the strength to become a true hero. Clasping his hands tightly together, he poured his entire soul into the plea, begging for enough power to shed his weak nature, stand tall against rival peers, and protect the girl who believed in him. As his prayer reached its peak, a radiant beam of light broke through the ornate stained glass window above, forcing him to gaze upward in quiet awe. However, his hopeful gaze turned to utter bewilderment as a rusted, battered blade materialized before him rather than a glorious treasure. Upon seeing the miserable state of his divine weapon, the gathered crowd erupted into cruel laughter, while his arrogant rival smirked in utter contempt. Despondent under the heavy veil of public laughter, he hung his head in shame. Unnoticed by the mocking crowd, a pair of elegant, high-heeled boots clicked firmly across the polished stone floor toward them. As the mysterious, noble-looking figure strode past the onlookers, quiet whispers began to ripple through the cathedral. The onlookers immediately recognized the prominent traveler and watched in awe as she approached her destination. Stopping directly in front of the astonished young girl, the leader of the hero's party offered her a life-changing invitation, asking outright if she would join her legendary party. Overwhelmed by the unexpected offer, the girl stammered in disbelief, wondering if the recruiter could possibly mean her, while the surrounding crowd shouted in excitement, urging her to accept immediately. Confirming her identity with cool indifference, the veteran adventurer instructed her to hurry up and follow along, leaving no room for hesitation as she turned to leave. Before she could step forward, however, a swift hand reached out and firmly grasped her sleeve to stop her in her tracks. Refusing to leave her friend behind, she pulled the reluctant boy forward, calling out desperately for the scout to stop and give them a moment. Earnestly pleading on his behalf, she begged the leader to allow him to join the party as well, but the cold reality of his status window displayed an F-rank rusted sword with 0 statistical attributes. Turning back with a piercing gaze, the hero party leader bluntly rejected the plea, telling him directly that he was entirely incapable of ever becoming an adventurer. Crushed under the weight of her definitive verdict, he cast his eyes downward into deep shadow, silently enduring the heartbreaking sting of rejection. He stood quietly as the recruiter explained the harsh reality of their world. Individuals of magical lineage possessed an impenetrable magic covering, leaving lower-ranked sacred weapons completely useless against them. Looking down at the rusted blade in his hand, the leader confirmed its F-rank status, forcing him to accept that the blessing ceremony had been a total failure and that he was seemingly destined to be protected forever. Though his companion passionately argued that one could never know without trying, the recruiter coldly advised him to give up, warning that pushing himself further would only make him prey for magical beasts. As the recruiter turned away, the young girl stepped close to him, eagerly offering to help him overcome these obstacles together. Her offer of help echoed in his mind, striking a deep chord within his pride. Gazing into her earnest eyes, he realized she was willing to reject a hero's invitation just to stay behind and protect him in the days ahead. Memories of an oath made long ago resurfaced. A quiet determination never to remain the one constantly needing protection. Shaking his head, he firmly told her to proceed with the party without him, declaring that he would take the adventurer's exam alone and eventually grow strong enough to stand beside any hero. With tears spilling from his eyes, he shouted his solemn promise to catch up to her, swearing to become a man capable of shielding her with his own power. His intense declaration awakened a vivid memory within her, a moment when he had bravely thrown himself in front of wild beasts to protect her. She vividly remembered their childhood, catching her breath as they held hands tightly after fleeing from dangerous beasts, reassured by his comforting words that the danger had passed. Even while crying himself, he had wiped away her tears and pleaded with her not to cry, proving his bravery long ago. That moment had burned into her mind, cementing him as her true hero. Returning to the present, she wrapped her arms around him in a tight, affectionate embrace, promising to wait for him before gently placing her hand over his face. Looking down at him with an encouraging smile, she sealed their new vow, challenging him to grow strong enough to catch up to her. Nearby, Helio scoffed indifferent to their emotional farewell, while Rust's prized hero storybook lay forgotten on the ground. Moments later, the carriage rolled away into the distance, bearing Ruby and the hero party toward their destiny while leaving the young boy behind on the lonely road. Watching her departure, he acknowledged that although their initial dream of adventuring together had fallen apart, a new bond had taken its place. He held up his pitted, rusted blade, a weapon deemed the absolute weakest, and smiled resolutely, realizing that like his rusted namesake, he refused to let his limitations stop him. Standing firm under the vast sky, he vowed to walk his own path with pride, confident that he would one day rise to stand beside her once again. Standing resolute as he looked out over the rolling landscape toward the distant town, he proclaimed his vow to first become a proper adventurer and ultimately a true hero. With quiet confidence, he addressed the rusted sword at his side, asking his new partner to stand by him on the long journey ahead. Long ago, a young girl sat quietly beside a boy who was neither brave nor powerful, reading stories of grand heroes who felt worlds away from his timid nature. He possessed no legendary sacred weapon to boast of, yet whenever danger threatened, he stood resolutely before her, a true hero in her eyes. Sudden snarls shattered the memory as a wild creature unexpectedly burst from the forest shadows. In a flurry of panic, Ruby instinctively drawn her sword and struck down the threat before her companions could even react. She immediately began apologizing for her knee-jerk reaction, while the witch companion casually reassured her that the weak beast posed no real threat. Joining the exchange, their noble ally pointed out that formidable monsters rarely lurked in forests so close to human villages anyway. She then called out to Ruby directly, prompting the young woman to turn back with an embarrassed smile as she slid her blade back into its sheath. Her companion reminded her sternly that such minor opponents were hardly worth getting flustered over, prompting another embarrassed apology. As they resumed walking through the woods together, a wave of nostalgia washed over Ruby, remembering how frequently she used to visit these very woods as a child to play with the village children. She was quiet for a moment when asked if she was worried about Russ staying behind. Looking up with calm confidence, she quickly reassured her companion that she was not worried in the slightest. As they continued along the shaded path, the witch noted that a forest safe enough for local children to play in naturally lacked ferocious beasts, yet Ruby countered that something far more extraordinary resided there. With a warm, affectionate smile, she declared that the extraordinary presence was none other than a true hero, her mind drifting back to a cherished memory from their youth. In her memory, she remembered confronting Rust outside his rural cottage, surprised to find him dressed for hard farm work instead of holding a blade. Seeing how much labor had fallen upon a single household, the earnest boy had resolved to dedicate himself to farming, eager to help lighten the burden starting that very day. Before he could head off to the fields, she thrust a heavy sword into his hands, insisting that a weapon was what truly belonged in his grip. His knuckles tightened on the hilt as he admitted his true desire to become an adventurer, prompting her to remind him that such a dream left no time for tilling the soil. Understanding the perils ahead on his chosen path, she demanded a single promise, that he would turn and run without hesitation if danger ever proved too great. Walking down the dirt path afterward, the young boy observed carriage ruts left behind by travelers, quietly vowing to grow strong enough to repay the immense debt of gratitude he owed to his mother and to her. He resolved to become an adventurer, determined to close the vast distance between himself and Ruby no matter what it took. As he pondered whether something similar had happened when they were children, a sudden rustle from the dense foliage shattered his train of thought. Caught off guard by his own daydreaming, he barely had time to register the towering tramp bursting from the brush before a powerful root swept him off his feet, sending him hurtling helplessly through the air with a cry of alarm. Desperately attempting to counter, he swung his blade against the creature's wooden tendril, but the blow rebounded uselessly without leaving so much as a scratch on its dense bark. Battered and aching on the ground, the reality of true combat crashed down upon him as the wooden behemoth roared triumphantly above. Yet, fueled by the vow he made to Ruby, the promise that he would one day stand at her side as an equal, he forced himself back onto his feet and readied his weapon with fierce resolve. Though he managed to escape that day with little more than bruised pride, Ruby teasingly commended his swift retreat, prompting him to pout in frustration over his clear lack of martial strength. The very next day, a spirited battle cry echoed through the morning air as he resumed his training with renewed zeal. Locking his sight onto the target, he focused all his strength into a swift, decisive slash. The blade severed the thick wooden stalk cleanly in half, causing him to cheer in victory before suddenly pausing to question how his blunt training weapon had delivered such a lethal cut. Day after day, Rust dedicated himself to relentless training, attacking wild beasts tirelessly while passing villagers could only watch in bewilderment at his ceaseless routine. He threw his whole body into every dodge and strike, refusing to rest no matter how much dirt and sweat covered him. With wild determination burning in his eyes, he drove his blade forward again and again, pushing his limits past every threshold. 3 years passed over the quiet countryside, where peaceful skies and rolling hills masked the steady flow of time. In the middle of the village square, 2 local women chatted casually about finding work in the capital, blissfully unaware of the monstrous treant suddenly looming directly behind them. Hearing their gasps, Rust darted forward in an instant, his sharp gaze locked onto the beast as he positioned himself between the creature and the defenseless villagers. Severing the threat with a swift stroke, he checked on the frightened women, noting how unusual it was for a monster to wander so close to the village entrance. But before anyone could catch their breath, the fallen beast vanished into a puff of smoke, leaving the young fighters staring in surprise at the empty air. He offered a sheepish grin while the relieved villagers expressed their gratitude, gently teasing him about his unusual combat techniques while making sure he was unhurt. Later, as he rested beside his worn weapon, his mind wandered to Ruby, reflecting on the 3 long years since her departure and wondering how much closer he had come to reaching her level. He sat cross-legged on the dirt, staring down in frustration as he questioned whether 3 whole years of training had only allowed his weapon to reach level 10, wondering if he was fundamentally lacking something essential. Pushing himself to maintain resolve, he recalled seeing the local woodcutter brothers going about their daily labor, while village boys whispered about his endless practice, knowing that without relentless effort, he would never be able to catch up to her. The harsh voice of an older villager echoed in his mind, mockingly insisting that spending 3 years without any real breakthrough was entirely pointless, and urging him to recognize the futility of his struggle. Yet, above all those doubts, he vividly remembered Ruby turning back toward him as she left, promising with a gentle warmth that she would be waiting for him. Resting against the massive trunk of a forest tree, he squeezed his eyes shut in quiet despair, wondering how he could ever hope to close the vast distance between them. Suddenly, a sharp, terrified scream shattered the quiet forest, instantly shocking him out of his quiet contemplation as he recognized the cry of a young child in distress. He immediately bolted through the trees toward the sound, deeply bewildered as to why a small child would be wandering alone in such a hazardous area at this time of day. Bursting into a clearing, his breath caught in his throat as he discovered young Ruby cornered helpless before two aggressive reptilian monsters. A sudden flash of memory clicked into place as he recalled that back when they were little, Ruby had once gotten lost in this very forest and had nearly been killed by wild beasts. Overcome by the desperate urge to protect her, he hurled himself forward at full speed, roaring at the creatures to stay away from Ruby as he closed the distance to fight. Screaming at the top of his lungs, the young boy fled through the woods, frantically pulling his companion along to escape the pursuing beasts. As the young children finally collapsed in exhaustion and celebrated their narrow escape, the older swordsman watched the memory unfold, astonished to realize just how helpless he had been back then. She tried her best to reassure him, pleading with him to stop crying. Yet he couldn't help but point out that tears were streaming down her face as well. Watching his younger self clutch nothing more than a fragile tree branch, he questioned which of them had truly been saved that day by such a feeble effort. Her earnest question echoed in his mind, asking if he was destined to become one of those legendary, heroic figures she admired so much. With a warm, trusting smile, she promised that she would patiently await the arrival of that grand day. Slowly, his eyes drifted open as the lingering warmth of the memory began to fade back into reality. Sitting upright beneath the shade of a large tree, he rubbed his head and realized that the intense recollection had merely been a vivid dream. Tightening his grip around the hilt of his sword, his resolve hardened as he vowed to work tirelessly until he could finally stand by her side as an equal. Before he could dwell on his thoughts any longer, a sharp scream pierced the quiet forest air, snapping his attention to immediate danger unfolding nearby. Realizing that what he had experienced was no mere dream, he urged himself forward through the woods, desperate to locate the source of the distress. Hearing rustling in the canopy ahead, his eyes locked onto a small figure standing alone in an illuminated clearing. Pushing past the branches, he burst into the open with wide, frantic eyes, calling out to see if she was unhurt. Unlike common monsters, demons possess true intelligence and wield dark sacred weapons granted by the god of evil, standing before the boy as the greatest threat to all mankind. The sheer terror of this revelation freezes the young farmhand in place, his eyes wide with dread as cold sweat trickles down his face. He stares in complete disbelief at his companions, unable to fathom their immediate instinct to flee. As the two villagers grab their weapons and turn to flee, they shout at him to fall back with them immediately. He passionately protests, demanding to know how they could abandon a helpless child, but the others counter that calling the village guards is their priority. They remind him that demons gain strength by slaughtering humans, warning that staying behind means certain death for them all. Refusing to give up, he desperately pleads with them to fight together using their sacred weapons, arguing the child will be killed before help arrives. However, his companions bitterly reject the idea, pointing out their weapons are merely D-rank and unfit for battle. Turning their backs on him entirely, the pair sprint away into the dense forest, shouting that they must warn the village before disaster strikes. Left standing entirely alone in the quiet woods, he grips his rudimentary sacred weapon with trembling hands, paralyzed by the weight of his choice. From nearby, the soft, tearful voice of the trapped little girl breaks the silence, desperately crying out for help. Above the child, the monstrous beast man raises his jagged greatsword, callously deciding to execute her despite the small blessing her death will yield. As the blade ascends, the boy watches in absolute horror. He stood his ground, shouting with all the strength in his lungs for the massive beast to step away from the child. Trembling yet resolute, he demanded once more that the creature stay back, but the demon merely glanced back in disdain, questioning who this fragile human thought he was. In response, the beast mockingly cupped a hand to its ear, taunting the boy about his faint voice, which only prompted him to charge forward while bellowing his order at the top of his lungs. As he launched his strike, the demon initially brushed it off as a pathetic trick, only to realize with mild surprise that the feeble blade was actually a sacred weapon. Amusement quickly washed over the beast, and it erupted into boisterous laughter at the utter absurdity of such a weak child attempting to confront it. Swirling its massive blade effortlessly through the air, the creature sneered, instructing the terrified boy to look closely so he could witness what a true sacred weapon actually looked like. With a single, brutal swing of its demonic broadsword, an overwhelming wave of explosive shockwaves tore through the forest clearing. The devastating impact shattered the surrounding trees and gouged the earth, unleashing a violent storm of dust and splintered wood. Standing triumphant amidst the freshly carved crater of ruin, the beast casually demonstrated the monstrous power behind a true weapon. Overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the destruction, he trembled in terror, realizing the nightmarish reality of the monsters that Ruby and the adventurers fought, while the young girl wept hysterically beside him. He quickly realized that facing such a monstrosity head-on was impossible, resolving instead to stall for time until the guards and the two brothers arrived. But before he could even reposition, a looming threat materialized right behind him, mockingly questioning what had become of his former spirit. Trapped beneath that overwhelming presence, he could only freeze in terror as the beast channeled a dark, ominous energy, staring down at him with utter disdain and hurling insults at his weakness. Then came the strike. With savage force, the demon unleashed a crushing blast that sent the young fighter airborne, a scream of agony torn from his throat as the shockwave destroyed the surrounding ground. Sniffing the crisp air, the monstrous beastman realized that absorbing energy from the fallen boy would yield little strength, yet something else quickly caught his attention. Detecting the unmistakable scent of human life nearby, he concluded that a settlement was close, promising an abundant harvest of divine blessings to claim through relentless slaughter. Turning his murderous gaze back upon the trembling boy, he cold-bloodedly declared that the execution would begin right here. Driven by pure desperation, the youth let out a fierce battle cry and charged headlong at the giant fiend. With a violent clash of steel, he threw his entire weight into the strike, desperate to keep the monster away from his helpless companion. Though the beast mockingly praised the boy's ability to halt his massive blade, he pressed down with overwhelming physical force, telling the aspiring hero that his effort was entirely in vain. Dark magic flared along the black blade, shattered the youth's defensive stance, and sent horror piercing through his wide eyes. The crushing blow hurled him backward onto the hard earth, leaving the creature free to discard him and advance toward the remaining prey. Lying defeated and helpless in the dirt, he watched the monster's looming silhouette pull away, crying out internally in silent apology for failing to honor their promise. Memories flooded his fading consciousness, a childhood pact made under gentle light, promising that they would someday grow up to become brave adventurers side by side. He gripped the worn hilt of his weapon with everything he had, knowing with absolute clarity that he was the only line of defense left for the girl behind him. Panting heavily through his teeth, he stared down the towering beastman, fully prepared to fight to the death if that was what it took to protect her. With a fierce roar of defiance, the young warrior raised his sword high into the air, resolute in his determination to defeat the monster before him. Before their blades could clash, a violent flare of blinding light erupted around the boy, engulfing the battleground in an overwhelming surge of energy. Driven by this surge, the weathered stone outer layer of his weapon cracked open and shattered into dust, unveiling the true, dormant force hidden within. A profound shift resonated through his body, his eyes sharpening as an immense magic power surged through his veins. The wolf demon recoiled in utter bewilderment, freezing in his tracks as he witnessed the sudden, menacing aura radiating from the transformed weapon. In the boy's hands now rested a formidable dark blade, the S-rank sacred weapon known as the Devil's Curse, pulsing with high-level magical power. Stumbling back in shock, the beastman struggled to comprehend how the frail human and his broken sword could have instantaneously evolved into something so terrifying. As the beastman braced himself, Rust marveled at the incredible S-rank sword in his grip, feeling a fresh, boundless energy overflowing throughout his entire body. He held his ground firmly against the giant blade, meeting the beastman's fierce strike with unflinching eyes. The demon snarled in irritation, infuriated by the defiant glare burning in the boy's stare. Pressing the offensive with overwhelming fury, the monster shouted for him to speak his mind if he had something to say. But the boy simply replied with calm certainty, stating that he had already been making his intentions clear from the very beginning, catching the beast completely off guard. Delivering a swift, powerful slash with his newly awakened weapon, he blew the beastman backward, reiterating his single unbreakable command to step away from the girl. A strange new power surged through his veins, transforming his rusty blade into a newly evolved weapon overflowing with magic. Feeling the raw energy pulsing from the sword, he stared ahead with resolute eyes, completely certain that defeat was no longer an option. Across the sunlit clearing, the towering demon stood frozen, staring at the slender boy whose newfound aura now filled the quiet forest clearing. The beastman gritted his fangs in disbelief as pain stung his shoulder, realizing with growing outrage that a mere human boy had managed to pierce his heavy armor. Driven to a frenzied rage by the humiliation, he let out a deafening roar and charged recklessly across the grass, claws bared and sword raised high. Seeing the beast rush headlong toward him in a frantic blur, the young swordsman remained calm, tracking every heavy footstep of his opponent. As the distance closed, the creature swung his greatsword down, unleashing a swirling wave of dark energy that ripped through the air between them. Spurring his dark sword with incantations, the demon cast the dangerous enchantment known as Hellfire, startling the boy as black flames enveloped the blade. The fiery impact erupted with devastating force, yet the boy stood his ground against the onslaught, bracing his sword against the swirling dark magic. Behind the clash of iron and magic, his gaze remained focused and razor-sharp, ready to deliver his decisive counterstrike. He stood motionless, watching as the formidable beastman dissolved into ash, cursing the strange power of his newly evolved sacred blade. Standing victorious with his back turned, the exhausted fighter finally allowed himself to process the impossible truth. He had actually defeated a high-ranking demon on his own. But as the adrenaline wore off, his body gave out entirely, and he collapsed onto the dirt path, while the little girl ran toward him in panic, shouting for him. His vision blurred as heavy eyelids began to sink, carrying only the faint image of her tearful face before pitch-black unconsciousness took over. Sometime later, he awoke to find himself resting in a quiet, cozy bedroom, sitting up as his senses gradually returned. The door clicked open and his mother walked in, reassuring him warmly as she explained that local guards had rescued him from deep within the woods. Concerned for others before himself, he immediately inquired about the little girl, only to be relieved upon learning that she was completely unharmed. Sitting beside his bed with a plate of sliced fruit, she gently confessed how much she had worried over his relentless monster hunting over the past 3 years. She fondly recalled all the times he had returned home looking battered like a worn-out rag, admitting how fragile and weak he had always appeared to her. Looking at him with a proud, loving smile, she praised his remarkable growth, sharing that the young girl he saved had offered her sincere, smiling gratitude. She looked upon her son with gentle affection, leaving the boy deeply moved and barely able to speak her name. She asked if he still intended to take the entrance exam for adventurers. Though he hesitated, worried about the burdens he had placed on her, she cut his concerns short by pulling him into a firm embrace and asking for a single promise. Holding him tightly, she pleaded with him to make an absolute pledge, never to die before his mother. The raw emotion in her command left him completely stunned in her embrace. He agreed tearfully, expressing his deep gratitude for being born her son. Yet, as quiet settled over the house, she immediately began piling on a long list of additional motherly demands, prompting a light-hearted protest from her son. 3 years had passed since Ruby's departure, and the moment Rust had long awaited had finally arrived. Bound for the town of White Rond, a famous hub for aspiring rookies, he set out to take the entrance exam for the Adventurers Guild, determined to begin his journey. Unstrapping his weapon along the path, he stared down in dismay as the blade had already reverted to its former, corrosion-covered state. Though the blacksmith brothers had crafted a custom sheath as an apology, the weapon refused to fit properly inside it. Recalling the unique nature of his power, he remembered that the skill known as evolution required a potent desire to fight in order to manifest the blade's true form. He concentrated on that dormant potential, waiting for the transformation to trigger. Channeling the desperate resolve he had felt during his encounter with the demon, he swore to become a hero powerful enough to protect both Ruby and his mother. In response to his surge of determination, the rusty metal suddenly snapped and shuddered, shedding its degraded surface. Holding the freshly transformed, pristine sword, he realized that even a slight awakening of his battle intent was enough to activate the skill. Upon closer inspection, however, he could not help but notice how strikingly similar its sleek design was to a demon's sacred weapon. Testing its balance, he executed a swift horizontal strike through the air, marveling at the formidable weight and sharpness of the restored blade. Glancing at the weapon's detailed attributes, he discovered that he possessed the ability to view status information beyond his own parameters. He remembered how the guard who rescued him had been unable to distinguish between his sacred sword and the slain demon's weapon, leading the man to bring both blades back to his home. Unable to leave such a dangerous artifact unattended in his village, he had been forced to carry the demonic sword along on his voyage, despite the troubling aura it radiated. Drawing both weapons simultaneously to compare them, he watched in utter shock as the two blades began to resonate, glowing with an intense energy that lifted them into the air. Staring at the glowing interface before him, he gaped in astonishment as the system initiated a fusion process between his sacred weapon and the devil's cursed sword, unlocking powerful new hellfire abilities. He stared in disbelief at the glowing prompt before him, stunned by the revelation that his sacred weapon possessed the incredible capacity to synthesize with dark artifacts. Reflecting on how the demon had channeled power through enchantment, he realized that absorbing the cursed sword had integrated its sinister elemental magic directly into his own blade. Nervously chuckling at the absurd strength now at his disposal, he marveled at stats that exceeded 500 points even without enchantment, while the felled beast's remains withered away beside him. Before he could fully digest his fortune, screeching treant monsters burst from the surrounding foliage, surrounding him in a sudden ambush. Without a moment's hesitation, he drew the dark, freshly synthesized sword as the horde lunged toward him. Firmly gripping the hilt, he took a balanced combat stance, ready to put his blade's newly acquired powers to the test. Invoking the spell aloud, he unleashed the Hellfire enchantment, commanding a surge of dark flames that erupted violently around the attacking beasts. A towering inferno consumed the clearing in an instant, burning the wooden creatures to ash while leaving him untouched amidst the blaze. A wide, bright smile broke across his face as he realized the enchantment had succeeded beyond his grandest expectations. With the last screaming monster reduced to embers, he stood victoriously in the smoldering glade, admiring the terrifying potency of his newly forged weapon. He collapsed onto the dirt, clutching his head in agony as a sharp, agonizing pressure tore through his skull. Drops of cold sweat ran down his face as he struggled against the intensity of the pain, wondering if he was experiencing the deadly curse of the dark blade lying beside him. Screeches pierced the air as another threat swooped in from above, forcing him to look up in shock at the approaching danger while he lay helpless on the ground. Before the monster could strike, a loud shout echoed across the field as a stranger sprinted into the fray, their quick footsteps kicking up dust as they rushed to intervene. A young girl wielding a massive shield intercepted the blow, protecting him from harm. Stunned by the unexpected rescue, he blurted out a question, but she quickly turned toward him with a worried expression, asking if he was all right. Upon arriving in the white-walled city of Whiterond, Russ stood before the colossal Adventurers Guild building, overwhelmed by its immense scale. Reaching for the heavy entrance doors, he took a steadying breath, eager to step over the threshold and finally begin his journey as a licensed adventurer. Stepping into the bustling main hall, the novice found himself surrounded by seasoned warriors and intimidating combatants, the true reality of the adventurer world taking hold. Scanning the massive crowd, he realized that every applicant gathered inside was there for the exact same purpose: to face the notoriously difficult entrance exam. Nearby, another applicant trembled over the exam's grueling 10% pass rate, but he steeled his resolve, vowing that failure was not an option if he wanted to reach the level of those he admired. Suddenly, a young woman wielding an enormous sacred shield stepped heroically in front of him, dramatically urging him to retreat while she held off whatever danger lay ahead. He stared at her in complete bewilderment, deeply impressed by her extraordinary shield weapon and resolute posture as she assumed he needed protection. As the sudden tension hung in the air, his lingering headache abruptly cleared, leaving him staring in shock at his sacred broadsword as it reverted back into a chipped, rusty blade. Beneath its weathered, pitted exterior lay the true identity of the mysterious weapon, the ancient and feared devil's cursed sword. Unfazed by its crude appearance, the young man gripped the worn hilt to take his stance, prompting the shield maiden to cry out in absolute panic at the sight of his rusty weapon. He swung his newly awakened weapon with immense force, unleashing a dark wave of power that instantly obliterated the surrounding threats. The young shield maiden stumbled backward in utter shock, unable to comprehend how a sacred weapon could take on such a sinister, altered form. As the dust settled, she approached him cautiously to inquire about his condition, expressing her deep gratitude for his swift rescue. Realizing they had yet to exchange proper greetings, the young maiden formally introduced herself as Daya Carrot. He offered a warm smile in return, introducing himself as Rust Stone while explaining that his sacred weapon transformed slightly upon use and left him quite drained. Preparing to head off toward the exam grounds, Daya asked about his plans, to which he admitted he needed a brief moment of rest after the exertion. Bidding Rust farewell, she turned to walk away, reflecting inwardly on how she had always relied on others for protection up until this point. Looking down at his own hand, Rust clenched his fist with unwavering resolve, swearing to himself that his days of powerlessness ended today and that he would protect the people he loved. Joining the gathered crowd of applicants, he surveyed the diverse group of warriors and noticed the wide array of unique sacred weapons among them, while murmurs rippled through the candidates regarding a strangely dressed figure standing at the front. Stepping onto the elevated platform with an eccentric flourish, a small girl dressed in Gothic Lolita attire presented herself as Garnet Charm, the official overseer of the Adventurers Guild entrance examination. She declared that the test would take place within the forest of 7 prismatic colors, instructing every applicant to seek out and retrieve a specific item she displayed before them. Hearing this simple objective, the crowd broke out into cheerful chatter, confident that the examination would be far easier than they had originally anticipated. She cheerfully added a crucial detail. The forest was crawling with demon kobolds that had a habit of stealing from humans, meaning every single target doll was currently in their possession. Upon hearing this, Rust realized that the entrance exam would be far from easy. Surrounded by monsters, candidates were being tested on their combat prowess, tracking abilities, and survival skills in real conditions. She went on to explain that while other monsters lurked inside, the guild bore no liability for any injuries or accidents, dropping another bombshell that with a limited number of dolls, candidates were free to steal them from one another. While reminding everyone that killing fellow candidates remained a serious crime, she warned of renegades, criminals who abused sacred weapons, making Rust realize that becoming an adventurer meant eventually fighting corrupt human foes as well. To encourage teamwork, she announced that candidates were permitted to form parties, though every individual member would still need to bring back their own designated doll to successfully pass. Clapping her hands together, she declared the official start of the 2-hour examination, leaving Rust to anxiously ponder whether he could find even a single ally among the crowded venue. As other applicants eagerly paired up around him, he overheard discouraging whispers mocking his seemingly useless, rusted sacred weapon, making any potential alliance feel hopelessly out of reach. Amidst the bustling crowd, a timid, hesitating voice suddenly spoke up, pleading softly with nearby candidates to be accepted into a party. Turning toward the sound, he was stunned to recognize Daya Carrot, realizing with amazement that the girl he had rescued earlier was also taking this exact same entrance exam. A harsh voice echoed across the gathering ground as an arrogant young woman pointed an accusing finger at Daya, openly questioning why her group was forced to team up with someone so completely useless. The cruel words dredged up bitter memories for Rust, recalling all the times he had been told he lacked the talent to ever become an adventurer or a hero. Meanwhile, the girl continued her tirade, declaring that true adventurers conquer monsters, whereas someone who couldn't even slay a single beast despite wielding a sacred shield was a disgrace. She reminded her companions that the entrance exam required collecting dolls for every party member through monster elimination, making an incompetent teammate a dangerous burden. Tightening his grip, Rust watched as the argument escalated. Though Daya timidly pleaded for a chance, Noting they were from the same village and she had no one else to rely on, the girl harshly shoved her away, dismissing her with cold irritation. Before the confrontation could go any further, Russ stepped firmly between them, grabbing Daya's attention and declaring that she would be coming with him instead, catching the arrogant ringleader completely off guard. Shockwaves rippled through the group as Daya recognized his name, while the disgruntled girl demanded to know who he was to interfere in their business. Turning directly toward the startled shield-bearer, the young swordsman made his offer loud and clear, formally inviting Daya Carrot to form a party with him. A stunned silence fell over the surrounding crowd, leaving the arrogant trio completely speechless as they gasped in utter disbelief at his audacity. Offering her a warm and confident smile, he reassured the stunned girl that their skills would complement each other perfectly, asking for her partnership as her jaw dropped in astonishment. His sudden proposal left the bystanders in utter disbelief, sparking immediate resentment and mock laughter among Daya's former teammates, who sneered at his worn blade and questioned his sanity. High above the plaza, Garnet Charm observed the commotion with amused satisfaction, deeming the bold pair to be promising risk-takers worthy of support for the future. 30 minutes after the exam officially commenced, quiet settled over the vibrant woodland, where prismatic lights glowed softly among the ancient trees. Wandering through the luminous grove, the young swordsman marveled at the scenic beauty around them, while his shy new companion offered a quiet, nervous assent. Continuing down the path, he admitted his preference to avoid unnecessary conflicts, though he recognized that actively searching for monster targets was now mandatory. Sensing her lingering hesitation, he glanced back in mild concern, wondering if she regretted agreeing to join forces with him. Halting her steps, she softly inquired about his earlier claim regarding how well their fighting styles complemented each other. As she fidgeted nervously with her hands, a wave of panic washed over him as he realized she had completely misinterpreted his practical explanation as something romantic. Flustered and waving his hands wildly, he opened his mouth to clarify his true intent, only to be cut short by an incoming threat. Without warning, a savage wolf monster leaped from above with a fierce howl, but before the boy could react, Daya instinctively surged forward to shield him with her massive barrier. She held her position firmly as Rust explained his plan, suggesting that if she focused on defense, he could concentrate entirely on striking down the beasts. Rust confessed the limitation of his sacred blade, explaining that overuse brought severe headaches and a 30-minute time limit before he passed out, a revelation that left her wide-eyed with shock. Questioning whether she was truly capable of anchoring their defense, her doubts were met by Rust's quiet reassurance that having her protection allowed him to fight without hesitation. Still feeling inadequate, she admitted her belief that her weakness was why Amethyst had abandoned her, prompting Rust to open up about his own childhood as a bullied, tearful boy who understood the sting of feeling helpless. Rust reminded her that despite wielding a sacred shield incapable of direct offensive strikes, her true strength lay in her innate kindness and willingness to shield complete strangers. Looking her in the eyes with a warm, encouraging smile, he declared that she was already remarkably strong just as she was. Before the moment could settle, dark, crackling arcs of purple magic materialized in the air, signaling an abrupt spell casting. The explosive purple bolt shattered the forest's quiet, filling the air with smoke as Rust shielded Daya, who instantly recognized the familiar magical aura. Emerging through the haze with a gloating smile, Amethyst mocked their newfound partnership, declaring her intent to crush both of them where they stood. Facing off against a mysterious trio of opponents, Rust demanded to know the reason behind their sudden hostility. Unfazed by his question, the lead adversary calmly explained that she was merely retrieving exam targets as instructed, before mockingly warning them of a threat lurking right behind them. Before they could process her words, a wild kobold suddenly dropped down from above, taking both Rust and Daya completely by surprise. The creature cackled maliciously as it struck, forcing Daya to cry out under the pressure of the sudden ambush. Looking closely at the creature, she noticed that the exam doll they had been searching for was strapped directly to the kobold's waist. Realizing the enemy trio's true strategy, the pair watched helplessly as the women prepared to snatch the secondary target right out from under them. With cold authority, the opposing leader declared that they had left her no choice, calling forth her two martial companions, Spinel and Lapis, who lunged forward with twin scythes. Stunned by the tactical trap, Rust realized with horror that they had been baited all along. Channeling powerful enchantment magic, the two attackers imbued their weapons with elemental blood moon flames and blue moon frost. Overwhelmed by the sudden display of deadly magic, Daya and Rust gasped in fear as the elemental assault was unleashed directly at them. He braced for the destructive blast as the dual elemental magic collided before them, but as the smoke cleared, Daya's massive shield stood utterly unbroken, absorbing the full force of the assault. Surprised to find themselves unharmed, the young swordsman and his companion exchanged bewildered glances while their attackers gritted their teeth in frustration at the failed ambush. As the wild kobold scurried away into the forest with a cackle, he pointed after the creature in annoyance, realizing how deliberately they had been set up. Without offering a moment of respite, the hostile mage unleashed a surge of crackling violet electricity across her palms, driving another violent magical strike toward them. Giggling condescendingly behind her hand, the enemy caster taunted Daya's defense, mocking that holding up a shield could never earn them a victory in battle. Checking on his ally amidst the haze, he was met with Daya's calm, unwavering assurance that both she and her shield were completely unaffected by the onslaught. The arrogant mage continued her scathing speech, declaring that a combination of a defensive shield and a rusted sword was a pathetic match that had no right to dream of becoming true adventurers. Demanding that they surrender the exam target immediately, the hostile trio moved to close the distance and strike them down. Unmoved by the threats, his grip around his ancient hilt tightened as the worn, rusted blade began to hum with a surging, latent energy that fractured the surrounding earth. Before the attackers could react, a sudden burst of speed carried the pair behind their foes, leaving the enemy mage to shriek out a panicked warning to her companions. He moved in a blinding burst of speed, unleashing a single, devastating stroke that sliced clean through the opposing squad's enchanted weapons. The sheer force of the impact shattered their steel, sending broken blades spinning uselessly through the air and leaving the attackers completely disarmed. Clattering fragments fell to the quiet earth as smoke drifted from the clash, cementing a decisive defeat before another blow could even be struck. Clutches of pain throbbed through his arm as the enemy leader backed away in disbelief, unable to fathom how C-rank magic-reinforced sacred weapons had been severed with such ease. Standing alongside Daya, he quietly identified himself as a fellow examinee and her friend, meeting the woman's panicked glare with composure. Pointed toward his companion's massive shield, he noted that had they welcomed her into their team, her barrier could easily have deflected his attack, just as it had stopped his earlier strike. Unable to stomach his rebuke, the leader shouted back in fury, refusing to let an outsider presume to understand her desperation or the burden she carried. Her resentment burned in silence, but he offered no further arguments, simply gazing back at her with unyielding calm. Rather than taking further action, he surprised the defeated trio by promising to escort them safely to the temple so their broken sacred armaments could be restored. Accepting responsibility for destroying their gear during the exam, he motioned for Daya to follow as they began walking together toward their destination. Continuing down the winding forest trail, the small group pressed forward on their journey. As they walked, she paused in her tracks, staring silently at Amethyst's retreating figure with a heavy, conflicted heart. Her eyes drifted down to the ground, where a small collectible figurine lay scattered near their feet before Rust carefully retrieved it. Holding up the newly acquired prize with an exuberant smile, the young swordsman cheered that they had successfully secured their first doll and needed only one more to complete their objective. Beside him, however, she could no longer contain her quiet grief, tears welling in her wide eyes and spilling down her cheeks in silent anguish. Glancing back at her distraught companion, he wondered what painful history lay between the two girls, filled with doubt over whether their broken friendship could ever be restored to how it once was. In truth, their story had begun years ago as childhood companions who grew up side by side in Violet Village, where the elder girl had always protected and guided the weakling who looked up to her. She had excelled in every pursuit: academics, combat, and grace, serving as a beloved older sister figure, Yet beneath that perfection lay an absolute determination to claim the top place above all others. Driven by a fierce inner vow, she refused to allow anyone to surpass her, consumed by the unyielding belief that she had to be the absolute best in everything she attempted. Night after night, she pushed herself to the absolute limit behind closed doors, studying relentlessly, learning to sprint faster, and training harder than anyone else, all in the hope that achieving top status would finally earn her the admiration and friendship she so deeply desired. She believed that if she could just secure the top rank, she would finally be accepted and never have to suffer through isolation again. Moments later, when her evaluation yielded a B-rank violet electric bracelet, the surrounding crowd showered her with admiration, while young Daya timidly offered her own congratulations. Full of warmth, she gently patted Daya on the head, urging her younger friend to have confidence in herself as Daya prepared for her own turn. When Daya stepped back from the pedestal, both she and Ruby expressed their gratitude as Amethyst offered her genuine praise. However, the mood shifted rapidly as whispers rippled through the crowd, revealing that Daya had manifested an extraordinary E-rank adamantine great shield. Overcome with hesitation, the young girl approached, stammering her words beside the towering radiance of her newly acquired artifact. Glancing back, Amethyst could only force out a hushed, painful apology, her world shattering in an instant. Bitter resentment consumed her thoughts as she questioned where her endless efforts had failed, agonized by the humiliation of receiving pity from the very person who had effortlessly surpassed her. Snapping back to the present, she lowered her head and apologized to her companions for allowing their sacred weapons to shatter in combat and holding them back. Tears welled in her eyes as she earnestly thanked them both for staying by her side despite her shortcomings, boldly declaring that they would repair their gear and continue striving to become the world's top adventurers together. She pondered deeply on the enigmatic sword user, questioning how his battered, rusted blade had suddenly transformed right before their eyes and wondering about his true identity. As they walked, her companions began bickering lightheartedly, teasing one another about who had been more terrified and on the verge of tears during their recent ordeal. However, their playful banter was instantly shattered when a sudden sense of grave danger prompted a desperate warning cry to look out. Before anyone could fully react, lethal high-speed slashes carved deep gouges into the earth, forcing the girls to dive out of the path of destruction just in time. Landing nimbly from the ambush, a beast-like cat demon chuckled maniacally, mocking their narrow escape while eyeing them up like helpless prey. Gazing upon the feral intruder with wide-eyed shock, she could barely comprehend the horrifying truth that a genuine demon stood right before them. Elsewhere, lingering thoughts of the past resurfaced, recalling the quiet wish to rebuild shattered bonds and walk the path of an adventurer together. Gently addressing the tearful shield maiden, Rust questioned whether she truly wished to regress to the passive relationship they used to share after coming so far. He offered a fresh perspective, advising her that instead of seeking the comforting safety of a younger sister's role, she should strive to become a true friend. A warm, radiant smile bloomed through her tears as she embraced his advice, resolving to no longer follow in her footsteps but to proudly stand beside her as an equal. As she watched from behind, Amethyst quickly deduced that the demon was vulnerable while casting its magic, immediately lunging forward to strike the creature head-on. Standing firmly in front of her companions, the noblewoman barked orders for them to flee, insisting that holding off the threat alone was far better than allowing all three of them to perish. But before she could hold her ground, dark shadowy claws slashed brutally across her shoulder, tearing through her tunic and forcing a cry of agony from her lips. Horrified by the sudden bloody strike, Daya watched in utter shock as Amethyst recoiled in terror, her burning desire to stand strong for her friend overwhelming her fear. Walking along the forest path, Daya suddenly came to a halt, her quiet gaze fixed on the woods behind them. Noticing her sudden hesitation, Rust turned back to inquire what had caught her attention. She was seized by an unmistakable sense of dread, convinced that something terrible was happening behind them and that she needed to turn back immediately. Hurrying back through the trees, the group cried out in alarm upon finding Amethyst collapsed on the ground, struggling under the weight of severe pain. She fiercely insisted that they leave her behind and flee, downplaying her grave condition even as the feral beast demon loomed in the background, flexing her lethal claws. Trying to force their retreat, she lashed out with harsh words, declaring that their presence was nothing more than a hindrance to her fight. Touched by the painful sacrifice behind her cruel words, her companions looked back at her with eyes brimming with tears, overwhelmed by agonizing hesitation. Reluctantly, they broke into a sprint to flee into the forest, while the beast demon cackled in delight, promising that their head start would not save them from her claws. Standing firmly in the path of the monster, Amethyst barred the creature's way, boldly declaring that she had discerned its weakness and would not allow it to pursue them. Before she could act on her words, the beast demon closed the distance with terrifying velocity, tightly constricting her furry tail around Amethyst's neck and leaving her gasping in helpless shock. She strained against her captor's grip as the beast demon tauntingly questioned if her invisibility weakness was that it vanished whenever she prepared to strike. As the creature swished around her, boasting that her incredible speed more than compensated for her flaw, she declared that both Amethyst and the twins were destined to die. Straining to keep her composure, Amethyst questioned why the monster attacked humans, all while secretly clenching her fist and desperately searching for a way to buy more time. The cat-eared demon explained that just as humans gain blessings from God by slaying monsters, her kind receives blessings from their creator for killing humans, adding that there was also another reason. Leaning uncomfortably close with a cruel grin, the beast demon confessed her sadistic love for tormenting humans, promising that Amethyst would soon be crying and begging for her life. Rather than succumbing to fear, Amethyst's eyes narrowed with sudden, unyielding determination. When Amethyst deliberately ignored her taunts, the demon grew bored and declared that the conversation and Amethyst's life was officially over. Channeling every ounce of her mana, Amethyst unleashed a devastating spell of lilac-violet electricity, engulfing the surrounding area in a violent blast of lightning. Panting heavily amid the rising smoke and scorched earth, she allowed herself a brief sigh of relief, believing she had successfully bought enough time. But her relief was shattered in an instant when a voice whispered right behind her, mocking that even lightning could not match her speed. She stared in horror, realizing the true nature of the demonic presence standing before her. Crackling with dark lightning, the beast demon mocked her efforts, declaring that similar powers had no effect on her before channeling her own chaotic spell, Chaos Bolt. Black electricity erupted through the air, striking with terrifying swiftness and shredding her defenses in an instant. An agonizing cry tore from her throat as blood sprayed onto the ground. Reveling in her suffering, the demon cackled maniacally, demanding to hear more of her helpless shrieks. Slumping to her knees with blood trickling down her face, her only comforting thought was that her companions had managed to flee to safety. Yet her merciless opponent showed no intention of stopping, gleefully promising to slice her up further for entertainment. Desperately trying to remain calm despite the agony, she resolved to gather her remaining electricity and bide her time for a single opening. Meanwhile, her pursuer stepped closer, gleefully detailing how she would systematically dismember her limbs piece by piece. As the shadow of death loomed over her, tears streamed down her bloodied cheeks, and a desperate plea for help escaped her lips. Suddenly, the sound of rushed footsteps shattered the terror as a fierce shout echoed through the field. With incredible force, Daya interjected her massive shield directly into the demon's path, blocking the incoming attack and sending a violent shockwave through the air. Seeing her ally standing firm, she reassured Amethyst that help had arrived. Standing tall like an unshakable wall, the silver-haired knight turned back with fierce determination, declaring that she would protect her friend at all costs. Surprised by the sudden intervention, the beast demon quickly regained her wicked smile, delighted at the prospect of fresh prey and preparing to unleash her fiery wrath. She watched through the settling smoke as Rust and Daya rushed to Amethyst's side, calling out her name in desperation. Overcome with emotion, the wounded warrior choked back tears and asked why they had risked their lives to return, prompting Rust to urgently instruct Daya to begin administering first aid. Clinging tightly to her companion's clothing, she pleaded through her sobs, questioning why they hadn't simply fled to save themselves. She looked down at her battered friend with deep compassion taking in her distraught words as she gripped her hands. With a soft, reassuring smile, she gently explained that her return needed no grand reason other than the fact that they were best friends. Their emotional bond was cut short by a mocking sneer as the demon stepped into view, taunting the sweetness of their friendship. She lunged forward with psychotic glee, declaring that she preferred tears of despair over happiness and intended to execute her friend right before her eyes. Before her vicious blades could strike, Rust charged in and intercepted her dual-wielded attack with a resonant clash of steel. He locked eyes with the monster and fiercely declared he would not allow her to harm them, only to be met by her enraged snarl for interfering. With a wicked grin, she began chanting her dark enchantment spell, unleashing crackling black lightning straight into his blade. She held a distinct advantage in raw speed, forcing Rust onto the defensive as dark flames burst around them through her enchantment magic. Though she possessed overwhelming swiftness, he soon realized that brute strength was on his side, driving his blade forward with enough force to shatter her momentum and sever her tail. Clutching her bloody stump, the beastkin demon howled in unbridled fury and pain, her eyes wide with shock over her severed tail. Taking a deep breath, the young warrior braced himself, realizing that despite his lack of combat experience, the formidable power of his sword could grant him victory. Suddenly, the sacred weapon began to crumble away into rust, catching both of them off guard as an excruciating curse manifested and seized him with pain. Observing the decayed blade resting on the ground, she began to suspect that his mysterious weapon carried a severe time limit or strict drawback. Seizing the moment while he was incapacitated by the curse, she lunged forward with bared fangs, determined to end his life without further delay. However, her savage strike was abruptly halted by a heavy metallic ring as Daya interposed her massive shield, blocking the blow effortlessly. The demon glared in disbelief at the impenetrable barrier, unaware that Daya's sacred guard possessed absolute, infinite durability against any physical assault. Rather than being discouraged by their unnatural powers, the demon grinned maniacally, thrilled by the prospect of hunting them down and claiming such extraordinary divine blessings for herself. She vanished from sight in an instant, leaving Rust utterly shocked as her supernatural speed took hold. Though the creature recognized the otherworldly nature of their sacred abilities, she remained supremely confident that such divine blessings meant nothing against her raw quickness. Unleashing a furious flurry of strikes from all directions, the demon attempted to breach their defenses, yet Daya intercepted every single blow with her massive shield. Frustrated by these seemingly impossible reflexes, the beast pushed her movement to extreme limits. Her composure shattered into wild frustration as she realized that Daya, a girl who had not even formally joined the rank of adventurers, was effortlessly reading her trajectory. Observing the miraculous defense, Rust pieced together the incredible truth behind his companion's power. He came to realize that she was not merely reacting to incoming attacks, but possessed the extraordinary ability to foresee future trajectories and track forces invisible to normal eyes. Even as the curse dragged down his strength and eroded his weapon, Rust called out to Daya to pinpoint their enemy's position. Following her prompt direction, he swung his heavy blade into what seemed like empty air. The swing slashed through empty air as the agile monster easily evaded the telegraph strike, mockingly taunting him for his slow reaction and misplaced confidence. Overcome by sadistic euphoria, the monster erupted into manic laughter, promising a swift massacre for both of them. Desperation mounted for Rust as he felt the curse taking hold of his body. Understanding that they possessed both the sight and the raw power to land a lethal strike, he knew he desperately needed a single moment of distraction to turn the tide. At that exact moment, a bolt of violent violet lightning crashed down directly upon the beast, engulfing her in a sudden explosion of electrical energy. Capitalizing on the magical strike, Amethyst shouted for Rust to attack immediately, while the arrogant beast demon merely scoffed through the lightning, fully confident in her resistance. Her lightning spell opened the vital window, allowing Rust to leap forward and slice straight through the wild beast demon's rapid assault. With a clean, decisive downward strike, his blade split the demon puppet in two, leaving the creature stammering in shock as its form shattered. Smoke sizzled and cleared across the forest floor as the defeat of the threat was sealed, leaving the area in quiet relief. Daya cheered in utter delight, celebrating their hard-won victory, while Amethyst and the surrounding group watched on in stunned disbelief at the outcome. Turning around to address the group, the young swordsman explained that their success was only possible because she had shielded everyone from harm throughout the battle. Flustered by his genuine gratitude, she stammered for an explanation, only to be met with his warm and smiling thanks. Suddenly, a loud announcement chime echoed across the entire forest, declaring that the exam was nearing its conclusion. The sudden reminder sent a jolt of panic through him as he realized there was only a single doll remaining, meaning only he or Daya could ultimately pass. Deep within a darkened forest, a group of hostile adventurers fanned out, searching frantically for a fugitive girl. Hiding behind a wide tree trunk, the young priestess clutched her head in terror as their harsh shouts echoed through the tree-line, threatening to capture her before she could reach the town. Cornered but resolute, she drew upon her sacred magic, channeling a gentle, radiant light into her palms to mend her wounds. As the soothing glow enveloped her hands, her determination hardened against those who sought to harm her. Her fear transformed into sheer indignation as she silently swore to overcome the ruthless pursuers who hunted her down. Returning to the present inside the guild hall, the town officials requested a full report on the demon attack once the official examination concluded. Standing beside the young swordsman, the light-haired girl gazed down at the small cloth doll in her hands, her voice trembling slightly as she addressed him. Handing the precious toy over to him, she earnestly urged him to pursue his path and become a recognized adventurer. She quickly insisted that he was the one who had truly earned the title by defeating the formidable beast and retrieving the token. Reminiscing about their initial encounter, she admitted that without his timely intervention, her own journey would have ended before it even began. Looking out across the bustling city street, she expressed complete confidence in his gentle heart and formidable strength, assuring him that he possessed the power to safeguard countless lives just as he had protected her. As he continued holding her hands in a moment of overwhelmed gratitude, a nearby voice teasingly interrupted, calling him a pervert for lingering so long, which caused both of them to freeze in embarrassment. Turning swiftly toward the sound, the young swordsman gasped upon seeing his companion standing healthy and active, only to be caught off guard when she playfully accused him of having a crush on the priestess. Flustered and stammering in protest, he desperately tried to deny the accusation while urging her to rest properly before pushing her body any further. He watched as Amethyst closed her eyes with a calm expression, acknowledging that she understood the situation completely and did not need to be told twice before taking her leave. Turning back toward her own companions, she insisted that their group needed to remain whole, deciding to settle the score right then and there, which left the young swordsman utterly bewildered by her sudden decree. As Daya tried to call out to her, Amethyst cut her off by using her nickname, turning on her heel and walking away while telling the younger girl to keep this moment in mind. The young shield-bearer gasped before firming her resolve, answering with newfound confidence, while the senior adventurer looked back over her shoulder with a competitive grin, promising she would catch up in no time. Watching the trio disappear down the street, Garnet stepped up to congratulate Daya and her companion, reminding them that they were now the only ones left to finalize their official registration. Expressing deep gratitude on behalf of the institution for their brave intervention against the demon threat, the receptionist formally declared both of them to be officially licensed adventurers. To mark the historic moment, two heavy wooden mugs clashed together in a resounding toast. Seated at a bustling tavern table piled high with delicious food, Daya marveled nervously at the extravagant feast, while her partner frantically checked his coin pouch, insisting that such an occasion warranted going all out with his savings. Between bites of their meal, he suddenly remembered a conversation he had overheard outside the guild regarding a special exception made for those whose exams were interrupted by the monster attack. He recalled hearing that Amethyst and her group would have another chance to take the official exam in just 2 weeks' time. Although she and her companions had departed, Rust reassured Daya that their friends would surely pass the upcoming makeup exam, prompting a soft sigh of relief from the young priestess as she enjoyed her meal. She beamed with relief and shared her hope that, Even if they had not become full-fledged adventurers together, they might still embark on grand journeys side by side in the future. Hearing her dream, he reflected thoughtfully and revealed that he too had made a solemn promise to become an adventurer alongside someone special from his past. He fell silent as she gently asked if he planned to reunite with them now that he held an adventurer's license, prompting him to recall how those figures had constantly shielded him when he was still weak. Staring down at his reflection in the drink, he admitted that his current strength fell far short of reaching them, but vowed to take every promotion exam necessary to climb the ranks. His bold declaration to reach platinum rank or beyond left her completely stunned, marveling at the sheer magnitude of his ambitious goal. She leaned across the table, her tone turning serious as she inquired if he had ever heard of the restricted zone known as the Silver Cavern, a dangerous domain strictly reserved for platinum-ranked adventurers and above. He confirmed her suspicion, admitting that entering that mysterious cavern was the true reason he had striven so hard to become an adventurer in the first place, leaving her curious as to why that place held such personal significance. He looked her in the eye and delivered the quiet, tragic truth. He needed to reach the depths of the Silver Cavern to uncover the fate of his parents, who had vanished inside years ago. She stood up abruptly in utter shock, slamming her hands against the bench and calling his name as the sudden revelation struck her core. She leaned in passionately across the table, blurting out a sudden proposal for them to form an adventuring party together, claiming they shared a natural chemistry. Her sudden outburst caught him completely off guard, causing him to burst into unexpected laughter. Catching his breath, he sincerely thanked her, admitting that her offer truly brought him joy. A deep blush rushed to her face as she pondered why his sentiment felt strangely familiar, while he prepared to reveal the core motivation behind his journey. He declared that his primary ambition was to become a true hero capable of protecting those he held dear, asking if she was still willing to journey alongside a dreamer like him. Without a moment's hesitation, her face lit up with a brilliant smile as she gave him her wholehearted agreement. With their partnership officially forged, they resolved to dedicate themselves fully to their shared path, determined to rise through the ranks together as the evening settled over the bustling city. Sometime later, the newly formed party returned to the guild hall, where Garnet greeted them with her usual vibrant energy, delighted to see the young duo back so quickly. She explained that amid the earlier chaos surrounding the demon incident, she had completely overlooked delivering something essential to them, sparking their curiosity as to what she was about to present. Sliding two dark, intricately decorated booklets across the polished counter, she prompted them to take a closer look, leaving both adventurers momentarily puzzled by the unexpected delivery. She revealed that these were official guild books, explaining that every quest fulfilled through the guild would earn them tangible rewards as well as official stamps to record their progress. When Rust questioned the exact purpose of collecting these stamps, Garnet cheerfully clarified that accumulating enough of them would grant them eligibility to undertake official promotion exams, a revelation that instantly ignited their excitement. Though she noted that the requests in this beginner town yielded relatively minor rewards, her offhand inquiry about whether they wished to take a promotion exam right away left them eager to prove their worth. He looked down at the request slip Garnet handed over, completely baffled by her claim that finding a missing pet was the ideal task for them. As they pointed out how low the financial reward was, the receptionist gently suggested that relocating their operating base might open up more lucrative, high-ranking opportunities. She thoughtfully explained that Blastoria hosted adventurers of all ranks, making it a safe and structured environment to build their repute. However, her offhand comment about adventurers recently vanishing in that region alarmed them, prompting him to set aside any relocation plans to solve the missing pet case first. Walking together toward the search zone, he admitted to his companion that as novices, taking on a modest assignment in the familiar prismatic forest was the most practical choice. She smiled warmly, recognizing his deeper empathy. If an untrained pet owner wandered into these hazardous woods alone, they would be in grave danger. Before he could finish praising the receptionist's foresight, a sudden, ominous rustling in the surrounding thicket brought them both to a sudden halt. Peering into the dense shadows of the trees, they gasped in shock as countless hooded silhouettes began to materialize from the foliage. He recognized the creatures as kobolds and realized with mounting dread that they had walked straight into a carefully orchestrated ambush. Brandishing their jagged daggers, the vicious monsters cackled gleefully as they closed the trap on their unsuspecting targets. Assessing the surrounding monster horde, the young swordsman realizes that while individual kobolds are weak, a simultaneous strike from every direction could easily breach their defenses, prompting him to ready a new weapon. He immediately invokes his sacred weapon synthesis, imbuing his armament with the cat demon's infernal black flames to startle the approaching creatures. Channeling even greater power into his blade, he initiates a dual enchantment that fuses dark lightning with fiery magic, causing an immense surge of energy to radiate across the clearing. With a fierce roar, he releases the tempestuous technique, driving the terrified kobold swarm into a complete retreat while his companion looks on in total bewilderment. He suddenly groans in pain as violent electrical sparks recoil across his right arm, forcing his shield-bearer to call out in alarmed confusion. As the smoke clears, their conversation reveals the true mechanics of his ability, which allows him to inherit both the physical form and combat traits of synthesized cursed arms. He explains that because his unique sacred weapon harbors multiple absorbed armaments at once, he attempted to stack their distinct magical enchantments into a single strike. Looking down at his blackened skin, he admits that while his weapon can endure the massive strain, his own human body cannot withstand such overwhelming feedback. Their quiet debrief is suddenly cut short when a small hooded child stumbles into the clearing, claiming to have followed the loud noises while searching for a lost pet. She trips over a tree root almost immediately, tumbling face first onto the grass with a sudden cry before either adventurer can react. He tried to warn his companion to wait, but the young priestess had already rushed forward to check on the child who had just tumbled onto the forest floor alongside her panting dog. As the cap fell away, the pair gasped in shock upon catching sight of tiny horns sprouting from her head, confirming his sudden, chilling realization that the seemingly innocent child before them was actually a demon. While his companion panicked over another demon appearing so soon after their recent battle, the young swordsman wrestled with an agonizing dilemma, contemplating whether he could truly bring himself to cut down someone who looked so overwhelmingly human. Having grown up reading grand tales of legendary heroes, he had never once questioned the fundamental belief that demons were the natural enemies of mankind. Every monster he had encountered until now had certainly fit that description, fiercely threatening human life and reinforcing his deep-seated beliefs. Yet looking at the helpless little demon trembling before him and his companion in the quiet clearing, a profound doubt began to creep into his heart. Reaching his hand out toward the frightened child, he watched her cower in terror as she recognized him as an adventurer wielding a sacred weapon. Staring into her wide, trembling eyes, he realized with a shock that from her perspective, adventurers were nothing more than terrifying monsters. Even as a small dog barked frantically beside them, he could sense absolutely no malice or hostility radiating from her frail frame. His companion called out his name in mild concern, noticing his prolonged hesitation while the barking continued to echo through the woods. Vivid memories of savage, bloodthirsty demons declaring their intent to kill him flashed through his mind, highlighting the stark contrast with the harmless child before him. Standing at this moral crossroads, he quietly pondered what a true hero would do, wondering how those he admired would act in this delicate moment. He fought against his internal turmoil, telling himself to pull it together and step up. Now that he was an adventurer, he had to make his own decisions rather than blindly follow prejudice. Before him, the horned girl cowered in terror, tears welling in her eyes as she desperately called out for her brother to save her. Seeing her sheer vulnerability broke through his hesitation, stirring a deep sense of empathy inside him. Reaching out a steady, open hand, he offered her a gesture of peace to show he meant no harm. Softening his expression, he apologized for frightening her and asked if she was okay, receiving a hushed, hesitant reply that she was fine. As his priestess companion noticed a little puppy with her, the girl softly explained that the animal seemed lost, so she had simply kept it company. Although she insisted she wasn't lost herself, he gently asked what a helpless child was doing alone in such a dangerous forest. He warned her of the dangers and offered to guide her back home, only for her to quietly reveal that she had nowhere to belong and no home to return to. Hugging the small dog close, she repeated her claim that she was not lost, clinging to the words as a shield for her own lonely reality. Turning to the stray, she gently urged the dog to go back to its home, reassuring the creature that she would be safe moving forward with these kind travelers. She giggled as her small stray companion licked her face goodbye before darting away into the forest, leaving her with Rust and his companions. The memory of its affectionate lick brought a fleeting smile to her face, a brief moment of warmth amidst her uncertainty. Daya suggested contacting the Adventurers Guild to inquire if there was a safe place for the child to stay, hoping the organization could offer a permanent solution. Rust reassured the startled child that they would keep her demonic identity secret, but Daya gently pointed out the harsh reality. Even if someone adopted her, her true nature would inevitably be discovered over time. Hearing their dilemma, the child quietly insisted that she would be fine on her own, claiming she was accustomed to isolation, though the sadness in her eyes betrayed her true feelings. Before another word could be spoken, a sudden, powerful magic blast struck the ground right beside them, casting a violent shockwave through the air as Rust instinctively dove to cover the girl with his own body. Taking the full force of the blast, Rust collapsed onto the dirt, groaning in pain. Yet despite his own injuries, his immediate concern was ensuring that both the child and Daya were unharmed. Tears welled in the child's eyes as she looked at him in disbelief, unable to comprehend why a human would willingly sacrifice his own body to shield a demon from harm. Gritting his teeth through the pain, Rust looked her in the eye and plainly stated that while she might be born a demon, she was certainly no enemy to them. Reaching out her hand with a gentle smile, Daya echoed his sentiment, expressing her deep admiration for the compassionate bonds humans were capable of creating. She channeled a glowing circle of recovery magic around her fallen ally, enveloping his injuries in a radiant crest of healing light. Feeling the soothing warmth mend his body, the young swordsman stared down at his intact hands in disbelief, realizing that if her future sight had failed to trigger, the surprise attack was never aimed at them in the first place. Before he could process the realization further, an aggressive spearman shoved past him with a sneer, demanding that everyone clear out of his path. Turning to face the attacker, he sternly reprimanded Helio for launching such a dangerous strike into a crowd, only for the warrior to dismiss him as someone too weak to even belong there. Standing his ground, the youth composedly announced that he too had finally registered as a full-fledged adventurer. His declaration was met with loud, mocking laughter, as the spearman scoffed at the notion that the guild must be desperately short-handed to accept a weakling. Glaring down with sharp hostility, the arrogant warrior demanded to know why an adventurer would ever dare to protect a demon. Stepping firmly in front of the horned girl to shield her, he insisted she harbored no hostility, but the spearman bellowed that ancient lore and absolute law deemed all demons inherent enemies of mankind. At that moment, the dark-haired investigator stepped forward, calmly explaining that they were handling an official request regarding missing adventurers and needed to take the child into custody for questioning. Clinging tightly to her protector in terror, the horned child wept softly and pleaded her innocence, while he recalled the guild receptionist's prior warning about the missing person reports. She cowered in fear as Helio brandished his massive spear, declaring there was no need to hand her over. He would simply execute her on the spot. Shocked by his sudden aggression, Rust and the others called out for him to calm down, but the hot-headed spearman snapped back, refusing to listen. With cold, uncompromising conviction glaring in his eyes, he asserted that all demons were monsters that needed to be exterminated without exception. Threatening to strike anyone who stood in his path, he cornered the group, while Rust quietly instructed Daya to take the young demon child to safety. Unwavering in his stance, Rust offered a calm refusal, triggering an explosive wave of fury as Helio bellowed his rival's name and lunged forward. Closing the distance in a flash, Helio landed a brutal punch directly to Rust's face, throwing him heavily off balance. Driven by sheer malice, he mercilessly kicked Rust while he was down, shouting insults and screaming that weaklings had no right to defy him. As the investigator called out to stop the violence, Daya courageously threw herself into the fray, positioning her grand shield between them to block the attack. Halting his strike against the heavy barrier, Helio sneered down at Rust, mockingly asking if he truly needed a woman to shield him every single time. With his anger smoldering beneath dark bangs, Helio declared that the sight of pathetic weaklings filled him with endless disgust. He glowered at the young priestess standing firmly in front of him, infuriated as she calmly called out his arrogant behavior and asked if that condescending attitude was how he always viewed those around him. Her blunt response left him sputtering with rage as he demanded to know if she had any idea who she was addressing, hurling insults at her. But she simply stared back with complete indifference, answering that she didn't know who he was and coldly asking for his identity. Surprised by the immense power radiating from her sacred shield, he hesitated for a brief second, allowing Rust to pick himself up from behind the defense, express his gratitude to Daya, and ask her to stay focused on guarding the young demon child. As the standoff continued, several nearby adventurers noticed that the demon child was left temporarily vulnerable and shouted that it was their chance to strike. But the dark-haired investigator immediately raised a hand to halt them, prompting confused demands from his peers about why they should hold back. Ignoring the commotion around them, the arrogant spearman channeled a surge of crackling electricity into his weapon, shouting an enchantment to unleash the full force of his Zeus bear, while roaring at Rust that swapping weapons wouldn't change a thing. Watching the lightning surge around his opponent, Rust quickly analyzed the situation, recognizing that his foe possessed vastly superior combat experience and tactical awareness, realizing with a chill that the initial deadly strike had been calculatedly directed at the child all along. Staring directly at his adversary, Rust acknowledged the harsh truth that merely wielding a superior weapon could not instantly bridge the gap in sheer skill and combat instincts between them. Knowing that taking such a thunderous assault head-on would be suicidal, Rust made a swift decision on his only remaining option, grasping his weapon tightly and beginning to recite his own enchantment. Unleashing a torrential blast of dark electricity with his Chaos Bolt, Rust took the offensive, determined to strike before his enemy could complete his attack and intending to shatter the Zeus bear before its lightning could be unleashed. Closing the distance in an instant, Rust moved at a speed that left his opponent gasping in sheer disbelief, surging forward with a furious battle cry to shatter the gap between them in one decisive strike. He unleashed his strike in a sudden blur of dark lightning, sundering the B-rank sacred weapon in a single decisive clash that left his opponent stunned. Helio, trembling with anger, scoffed at the idea that shattering his spear meant victory, even as the onlookers murmured in disbelief that a B-rank sacred weapon had been destroyed so easily. Before the young swordsman could react, Helio lunged forward and grabbed him tightly by the collar. Slamming him backward, the enraged adventurer spat insults, declaring that someone like him would never become a true adventurer. Grasping Helio's arm, the young warrior fought back against the accusations, reasoning that despite her race, the young demon girl had shown no hostility and had actively aided him, questioning whether being a demon automatically made her an enemy. The furious adventurer yelled back, telling him to present that naive logic to the countless victims who had lost family and friends to demons, demanding he ask them face-to-face if demons were truly the enemy. He mocked the young swordsman's childhood dream of becoming a hero, claiming he was entirely helpless on his own and possessed nothing more than empty, impractical ideals. Unwavering in his conviction, the boy shouted back that he intended to extend a helping hand to anyone in trouble, regardless of whether they were human or demon. Realizing his words were falling on deaf ears, Helio tightened his grip on his weapon and cold-bloodedly branded his former ally as an enemy as well. Just as tensions reached a boiling point, an authoritative voice cut through the air, demanding an immediate end to the conflict and forcing everyone to freeze. He stepped forward alongside his fellow guild officials, sternly reminding the aggressors that wielding a sacred weapon against another adventurer was strictly forbidden by law, a sudden intervention that left Rust utterly stunned. Looking out over the tense gathering in the clearing, the authorities announced that regardless of their motives, every party involved in the illegal altercation would face strict disciplinary consequences. Whispering murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd outside the guild quarters as rumors spread of an apprehension. Inside, Garnet looked up at the commotion, observing Helio and Rust standing quietly side by side. Positioned behind the reception desk, Garnet pressed the pair for answers, reminding Helio, Thor, and Ruststone that a guild officer had witnessed their clash on patrol and that turning a sacred weapon on a comrade was a grave offense. Incensed by the accusation, Helio pointed an accusing finger at his rival, loudly proclaiming that they were not peers and branding Rust an outright renegade. Garnet sought clarification regarding the claim that Rust was protecting a monster, prompting Helio to angrily assert that Rust had actively shielded the creature and initiated an assault against him. Rather than offering an excuse or denying the charge, Rust met her gaze with a stoic expression and softly acknowledged that the accusation was true. Stunned by his immediate confession, Daya turned to him in a panic, desperately trying to soften the admission by explaining that his actions were merely meant to intervene. Capitalizing on the moment, Helio scoffed with smug superiority, mocking Rust's silence and taunting him for lacking the courage to properly confront him. Before the taunts could continue, the dark-haired investigator interjected calmly, exposing the truth by declaring that Helio was the sole instigator and Rust had merely acted in self-defense. Outraged by the sudden betrayal, Helio rounded on his companion for speaking against him, but the investigator held firm, explaining that true camaraderie demanded honesty and accountability. He chastised himself internally, feeling pathetic for hesitating to stop Helio when he should have taken a stand, just as she had. Interrupting his gloomy thoughts, Garnet stepped through the doorway to ask if the questioning regarding the demon child was complete. She then delivered the guild's official verdict, explaining that because the testimony aligned, Helio and his party members would be placed under a week of house arrest and have their sacred weapons temporarily confiscated. Helio threw a loud, dramatic tantrum as the guild's staff escorted them out, while his dark-haired companion calmly urged him to come along without creating further trouble. Glaring back furiously at Rust, Helio shouted that he had no time to play adventurer while someone else was in grave danger, leaving Rust to contemplate the cryptic outburst. With the offenders removed, Garnet cheerfully motioned for Rust and his companions to follow her deeper into the guild hall. As they walked down the quiet corridor, Daya turned back and demanded to know why Rust had not stood up to defend himself against Helio's false accusations. The Beastkin warrior chimed in to scold Rust for his passive attitude, but Rust merely laughed softly, recalling that he used to hear that very same scolding in his past. Garnet paused mid-stride, turning back with a knowing look as she realized Rust had intentionally chosen to stay silent rather than being unable to defend himself. When Garnet asked if he was truly prepared to be mocked by society and labeled a renegade, Rust affirmed with unwavering eyes that his decision to protect the demon child was genuine. He listened intently as Garnet delivered her final assessment regarding the recent investigative findings. As he and his companions gathered around, the guild receptionist formally declared that the young Beastkin demon was entirely innocent of the local adventurers' mysterious disappearances. She went on to ease their worries, prompting a visible wave of relief to wash over the young swordsman and his party. She noted further that because of her demon heritage, the girl had endured constant hostility not only from humans, but from her own demonic brethren as well. She sat quietly beside Rust, who watched attentively as Garnet prepared to assign them a brand new directive. With a playful gesture, she officially tasked the party with escorting the demon girl on a long journey to the guild's central headquarters. Meanwhile, under the twilight sky, the defeated spearman and his comrades grumbled in discontent while serving out their temporary confinement. His composed, dark-haired ally produced a printed notice, bluntly confronting him about his obsession with glory and recognition. He glared at the paper in bitter frustration, reading the widespread news about his own childhood friend who had recently slain one of the 7 archdemons and achieved immense fame. Under the glow of the full moon, Rust and his companions quietly departed through the city gates, slipping away into the night to avoid making a scene. He led his companions along the moonlit path, explaining that their destination, the guild headquarters in Clearland, was the largest city in the region, bustling with countless adventurers. Amethyst agreed, noting that it offered the highest concentration of settlements and opportunities. As they made their way across the open plains, the young demon child voiced her anxiety about what lay ahead. Jia quickly reassured her, pointing out that the officials in Wytron had treated her fairly, and meeting the guild master directly could finally earn her permission to live peacefully among humans. Turning to face her with a warm smile, the young swordsman realized he had neglected basic pleasantries and offered his full name, Rust Stone. Jia joined in with equal enthusiasm, introducing herself as Jia Carrot so their young charge would feel more comfortable. Encouraged by their friendliness, the quiet girl lowered her hood slightly and softly introduced herself as Citron. The name immediately drew delighted compliments from the group, causing her face to flush with a deep, bashful blush. She continued walking alongside them as curiosity turned toward her origin, prompting Rust to ask where she had lived before meeting them. Citron murmured that her former home was Obsidian Mountain, a name that left Jia wondering what kind of environment it could be. Looking down under the shade of her hood, the young demon explained that it was a desolate region where everything was scorched black and flames constantly burned. Rust observed sympathetically that it sounded like a harsh place to survive, asking if she ever intended to return there. A shadow of anguish crossed her features as painful memories resurfaced, her eyes widening in distress at the mere thought of that place. Sensing the sudden drop in her mood, Rust called out her name in concern. Quick to break the heavy tension, he suddenly clasped his hands together and cheerfully announced that it was time to eat, asking if the two girls were starving. The sudden shift caught both Citron and Jia completely off guard, dispelling the gloomy atmosphere in an instant. Within moments, a crackling campfire lit up the dark woodland site as preparations began in earnest. Rust offered to set up the tents while asking Jia to take charge of cooking their evening meal. Seated around the warm fire on wooden logs, the group shared their simple provisions, with Rust inquiring if human food suited Citron's palate. She quietly assured him that it was fine, though her mild reaction left him wondering if she was merely being polite. He leans forward with open curiosity, asking Citron if she would mind showing him the unique properties of her sacred weapon. Seeing her pause, he hurriedly stammers an apology, assuring her that he does not doubt her intent nor fear her presence in the slightest. As she quietly chews her food in silent observation, his nervousness only deepens, leaving him fidgeting under her unreadable gaze. Breaking the awkward silence, the small priestess playfully chimed in to explain that he was simply a weapon enthusiast who became embarrassingly overexcited around rare artifacts, prompting a flustered protest from the young swordsman. Watching the exchange, the horned child offered a light-hearted tease before revealing with a giggle that she was merely joking, softening the mood around the campfire. Her expression softened into a warm, gentle smile, visibly touched by the genuine warmth and acceptance offered by her new companions. Demonstrating her trust, she shared the attributes of her sacred ring, revealing its high magic power paired with healing abilities and a photosynthesis skill. Reading the pristine level 1 status of her weapon, the swordsman felt a wave of relief wash over him. Realizing she had never taken a human life and understanding why the guild deemed her harmless. Reassuring her further, he noted that while most demon weapons were forged for destruction, her gentle power was meant to heal and protect others. Overwhelmed with emotion by his validation, tears welled in her eyes before she quietly excused herself to rest in her tent. Watching her retreat into the shelter, he reflected on the eventful day and proposed taking night watch shifts so everyone could get proper rest. Settling in with a warm drink under the night sky, the shield-bearer gently inquired if he was familiar with a protected sanctuary for demons known as Eden. She elaborated on the myth of Eden, describing it as a peaceful haven where humans and demons lived side by side without strife. A sanctuary the guild had intended as a place of refuge, to which he could only shake his head, unfamiliar with the legend. He pressed for the location of the legendary sanctuary, only to be met with disappointing news. Daya revealed that Eden was never actually built, as opposition had forced the plan to be scrapped. He slumped his shoulders in resignation, acknowledging that the hostility they encountered today made that outcome all too believable. Confused by the dead end, he wondered aloud why Garnet would mention a place that didn't exist. Daya explained the true meaning behind the gesture. Even if the project was abandoned, the mere fact that someone created the blueprint proved that others out there shared their desire to protect innocent demons. Her words resonated deeply within him as she reaffirmed her belief in their journey, regardless of what society preached. Reassured by her conviction, he offered a warm smile and thanked her, resolving that together they would surely find a safe haven where Citron belonged. With a clear goal ahead, the companions journeyed onward across the rugged mountain trails, keeping watch over the young demon child. As the hours passed, Citron bounded ahead merrily while Nyan stretched her arms, noting just how much distance they had covered since morning. Finding a secluded natural spring nearby, Nyan and Daya decided to step into the crystal-clear water, with Nyan casually asking if Rust would be joining them for a swim. The sudden question caused his face to flush bright red, while Amethyst immediately barked out a stern refusal on his behalf. Sitting near the water's edge, a gentle smile crept onto his face as he observed the peaceful moment, internalizing the profound realization that in peaceful times like these, differences between species cease to matter. The peaceful atmosphere collapsed in an instant as a sudden roar echoed through the glade, accompanied by ominous warnings of missing adventurers that made him leap to his feet and draw his blade. A massive, scaled beast monster erupted from the water, bearing razor-sharp teeth as its eyes locked menacingly onto Citron. She cowered in absolute terror as a squad of hostile demons suddenly surrounded them, clutching her chest while Rust and Daya struggled to comprehend how so many enemies had bypassed their detection abilities unnoticed. The massive reptilian demon stepped forward, raising his heavy serrated blade and issuing a harsh ultimatum to hand over the girl or die on the spot. Receiving no immediate reply, the monster swung his weapon down with violent force. Completely unfazed by the impending strike, he calmly muttered how painfully slow the creature's movements were. The brute roared with triumphant laughter, convinced his blade had found its mark. However, the young swordsman seamlessly glided out of harm's way, leaving the monster striking empty air. Raising his sword to block any further movement, he firmly delivered his response. He would not surrender the child, nor would he allow anyone present to be killed. Realizing the sheer disparity in speed and power, the reptilian leader panicked, recognizing that this opponent was nothing like what they were led to expect. Swept with fear, he ordered his troops to fall back immediately. As the demon guard attempted to flee, a swift and ruthless slashing stroke sliced through their ranks, instantly cutting down the retreating monsters. Standing amid the falling enemy squad was an enigmatic figure, coldly dismissing the slain demons as useless failures not worth keeping. Footsteps pounded rapidly against the dirt, accompanied by the ragged, heavy sound of desperate breathing. Exhausted from the relentless pace, Daya doubled over with her hands resting on her knees, struggling to catch her breath. She urged Rust to forge ahead without her, apologizing profusely for holding him back, but he paused, gazing at her with deep concern. Pressing forward together despite her fatigue, they finally arrived at their destination, the dark, jagged peaks of Mount Obsidian, looming ominously beneath a sky torn by lightning. Far from the storm, memory drifted back to a tender past, where young Citron had curiously asked her elder brother why he carried two names, specifically Lighttreat. Wandering through the peaceful pathways of their village, he had warmly explained to her that in addition to personal names, humans also held family surnames. Overjoyed by the idea, she had cheered excitedly, declaring her intention to take the surname Treat for herself so they could share a matching name. She fondly remembered how her brother always spoke of humanity with deep affection, enchanted by the loving bonds they formed with one another. Born in the same region, he had taken her into his care like a true sibling, mimicking human family structures and fostering a deep, protective bond between them. Their unique dynamic even extended to their equipment, as both shared matching ring-type mystic arms called the Ring of Faint Light. Recalling a human custom where lovers wore matching rings on the fourth finger of their left hands as a vow of togetherness, she had enthusiastically proposed they wear their matching rings in the exact same manner. She had questioned why the ring could not be placed upon her left hand, prompting her brother to gently explain that such a placement was reserved for spouses, whereas her right index finger, the finger used to reach out toward others, was far more fitting for her. He went on to describe how her inherent selflessness granted her a rare form of healing magic, one that drew no distinction between demon and human alike. Listening intently, her eyes shone with absolute devotion as she pressed her hands to her chest. With a warm smile, he affirmed that her mystic arm was a perfect reflection of her gentle heart, causing a rosy blush to spread across her cheeks. For a long time, it seemed as though those peaceful, cherished days would endure forever. But that serene tranquility was destined to shatter the moment an uninvited visitor arrived. Spotting a severely injured human warrior crawling in agony through the woods, Citron immediately discarded all caution and rushed over to render aid. Channeling the power of her mystic arm, she cast her restorative spell to soothe his wounds. Yet the moment the soldier realized his savior was a demon, terror seized him, driving him to scramble to his feet and bolt into the forest. She called out after him in bewildered surprise, watching helplessly as the ungrateful figure vanished among the distant trees. Back at their home, she pouted indignantly about the warrior's sudden departure without so much as a word of thanks. Her brother patted her head gently, suggesting the poor man had simply panicked from his severe injuries. Their quiet evening was abruptly interrupted by the dramatic entrance of an imposing horned demon commander, who loudly announced himself as Onyx, leader of the Onyx Legion, and expressed his gratitude for her having healed his subordinate. Without missing a beat, the loud commander boisterously demanded that she use her extraordinary power to regenerate his severed right arm and join the ranks of his legion immediately. He arrogantly suggested that the young demon girl could easily expand her powers by killing humans. However, the swordsman calmly interjected, explaining that she possessed no such ability and politely requested that he leave. Unfazed, the Dark Commander laughed off the idea that her wishes mattered at all. He then gripped his own face as a violent, terrifying aura erupted around him, snarling that he was not making a request, but issuing an absolute command. Before his sinister intent could manifest further, the young swordsman hurled an explosive orb directly at his feet, triggering a blinding burst. He screamed for the young girl to run away immediately while he held the line, prompting her to sprint into the forest with tears in her eyes. She ran until she reached the edge of a human village, her breathless, hurried steps drawing the confused stares of local farmers. She stumbled toward two of the men, weeping hysterically as she begged them to save her brother, causing them to step forward with tentative concern. As she continued her desperate pleading, her hat fell away, revealing the dark, sharp horns crowning her head. They recoiled in utter horror, shrieking in panic that a demon had come to murder them and urging everyone to flee for their lives. She tried to explain that she meant no harm, but their panic curdled into mob hostility as the townspeople armed themselves with weapons and closed in for the kill. She sank to her knees in complete despair, surrounded by blood and slaughtered villagers, as the Dark Commander loomed over the carnage to taunt her. He casually dismissed her defiance, turning his cruelty back onto the helpless villagers to break her spirit. As the child wept and screamed that she would never heal him after what he did to her brother, he simply declared that refusing would mean the death of everyone present. Demonstrating his horrifying power, the tormentor slowly twisted the bones and flesh of a screaming victim. He taunted her, explaining that since humans were their sworn enemies, taking his time to inflict maximum agony was only natural. Unable to endure the agonizing wails of the innocent any longer, the young girl broke down, begging him to stop the dreadful torture. Relenting with a sadistic chuckle, he released his magic, mockingly congratulating the survivor on his incredible stroke of luck. Before he could exploit her surrender further, a subtle twitch of his ear alerted him to approaching footsteps from the shadows, prompting him to call for his companion. Puzzled by the unexpected intruders, contrary to what Quartz had assured him, he commanded his minions to gather everyone left alive and fall back immediately. Seizing the fleeting moment of distraction, the child rushed to the fallen villagers, channeling her brilliant magic to mend their grievous wounds. He glanced back over his shoulder, a cold glare settling on his face as he watched her desperately pouring her energy into saving the very people he had tried to destroy. Meanwhile, at the mouth of the cavernous hideout, the figures stepped firmly into view, ready to confront the darkness within. Rust confidently confirmed they had tracked down the correct location, while a reptilian guardian confronted them, demanding to know what business brought them to the heart of the Onyx Legion's base. He listened intently as his companion urged him to charge inside the cave after Citron, offering to hold off the approaching enemy herself, even as their reptilian foe mocked them. She firmly declared that her massive shield was forged specifically to safeguard her teammates, pushing past his concerns regarding the strain of her mystic arms. Recalling her past failure to protect her loved ones, she swore a desperate vow that this time she would stand her ground, leaving him with a look of quiet resolve. As the demon commander ordered an immediate strike, she grabbed him by the shoulder and hurled him forward, screaming at him to press onward without looking back. An explosive blast shattered the ground behind them, but the momentum carried him forward into a full sprint as she urged him one last time to enter the cavern. Planting her massive tower shield firmly into the earth, she stood alone against the surging horde of enemies, vowing that not a single demon would cross her defensive line. Meanwhile, deep within the dark cavern, the towering demon lord stood menacingly over the wounded humans, barking a fierce command for their injuries to be healed. The Beastkin warrior urged the fleeing villagers to abandon any thoughts of fighting back, desperately pleading with them to simply turn and run for their lives. She shouted in anguish, reminding them that the demon lord had already overpowered them all, desiring nothing more than to ensure as many innocent people escaped as possible. As the grateful villagers scrambled away into the dark corridors, she questioned whether her decision was right, comforting herself with the belief that her brother would have praised her actions. While she held off the advancing forces at the cavern entrance, deep within the shadows, Citron could only watch in terror as the panicked villagers fled. Behind the young girl, Onyx unsheathed a cruel blade, cold-heartedly remarking that her efforts to heal the humans only prolonged their suffering. He loomed closely over her, taunting her affection for mortals and revealing that he had merely indulged her naive attempts at play-acting a savior. Leaning into her ear, the sinister demon dropped a crushing revelation, confessing that he had slain her brother, whose dying praise of her kindness had made her a target. Pressing a jagged stone into her trembling hands, he commanded her to crush the fleeing humans, framing the horrific act as the ultimate fulfillment of her brother's trust. Driven forward by his terrifying pressure, she hesitantly approached a wounded man on the cavern floor who gasped for mercy. As memory of her non-discriminatory healing power weighed heavily on her mind, she raised the stone high, sobbing hysterically and begging for someone to end her life. Before she could strike, a steady voice broke through the air, apologizing for arriving late. Silhouetted against a brilliant beam of sunlight, Russ stood tall at the cavern entrance. Tears welled up in her eyes as the stone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering uselessly onto the ground. She could only gaze up in profound relief as Russ stepped firmly in front of her, his eyes blazing with absolute resolve as he declared that everything was going to be okay. Gia reflected on her past, recalling how her healing magic had cost her everything: her brother, her home, and her place in the world. Surrounded by hostility from both humans and demons, she had felt truly lost. Standing amidst the clearing, Citron looked up at the companions who had arrived, her voice trembling as she questioned why they had come when she had tried so hard to keep them out of harm's way. Her mind flashed back to the cruel villagers who had once hunted her down, shouting in hatred and brandishing weapons simply because of her demonic blood. She wept as tears welled in her eyes, struggling to comprehend why anyone would risk their life to save a demon like her. Offering a gentle smile, Rust reassured her that regardless of her race, she was their friend. Nearby, Onyx scoffed, mockingly declaring that Citron was meant to grow stronger by executing humans. The boy's expression darkened, his eyes burning with intense fury as he locked his sights on the arrogant demon. Unfazed by the hostility, Onyx casually drew his sword, relishing the thought of adding another target to his hunt. As the antagonist burst into a booming laugh, the boy wound back his arm, channeling every ounce of his rage into a clenched fist. With an explosive surge, Rust lunged forward and launched a devastating punch straight at Onyx's face, roaring that he would never forgive him. He gasped in surprise as Citron stepped forward, casting a soothing spell over his injuries to provide quick first aid despite her own exhaustion. He tried to stop her, warning that pushing herself in her weakened state was far too dangerous. Yet, Citron remained resolute, insisting that she was the only one present capable of saving the innocent lives at stake. Touched by her bravery, the young warrior gently patted her head in praise, while Dia looked on with a warm, supportive smile. Across from them, the The dark demon mockingly asked if they intended to challenge him, only for the boy to declare fiercely that he was not merely here to challenge him, but to defeat him once and for all. Suddenly, a massive blast echoed across the landscape, signaling the ongoing fierce struggle nearby. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Dia stood firm behind her massive shield, completely unyielding against a barrage of enemy attacks. Observing her impenetrable defense, Cinnabar slithered into view, scheming on how to break through the maiden's guard. With lightning-fast reflexes, Dia leaped and tumbled through the air, deftly deflecting blow after blow from the surrounding monsters with practiced ease. Delivering a powerful counterstrike, she shattered her opponent's assault, sending the enemy crashing backward in utter shock. As the dust settled, the enemy foot soldiers picked themselves up, rattled and disoriented by the sheer force of her retaliation despite barely dodging a direct hit. Unfazed by the clash, Cinnabar leaned in close, her slitted eyes glinting with predatory curiosity as she carefully analyzed Dia's defensive powers. She was acting frantically, her desperate movements puzzling Dia, who watched closely while trying to make sense of the serpent demon's erratic behavior. Ordering her underlings forward, the monster barked at them to stop floundering around and launch a full-scale assault against the shield mystic at once. When one of the minions dared to voice concern over counterattacks, she silenced the creature with a harsh roar, demanding they show some courage and charge straight ahead. Pressured into action, the beastmen unleashed a coordinated flurry of elemental attacks, while Jia braced behind her barrier, sensing that something far more sinister was in motion. As the foot soldiers lunged forward with a furious war cry, the serpent demon cackled in the background, prompting Jia to realize that the rush was merely a diversion. Before she could adjust her defense, a massive torrent of corrosive liquid splashed across the area, a single burning drop searing into Jia's skin. Gloating over her trickery, the snake demon revealed the fluid to be Orochi's venom, a deadly liquid under her complete spatial control that brought instant death upon the slightest contact. The horrific scope of her cruelty unfolded instantly as her own soldiers collapsed to the ground, trembling in agony as the mist dissolved them where they stood. Looking down upon the dying minions with a sadistic grin, she mockingly thanked them for acting as efficient meat shields for her real strike. Despite the lethal onslaught, Dia's barrier remained unyielding and intact, leaving the serpent demon to curse the resilience of the mystic arms while chuckling in frustration. She recoiled violently as her initial strike crashed harmlessly against the impenetrable barrier, unable to dent Dia's defensive front. Outraged by the cold sacrifice of those minions, Dia shouted across the battlefield, demanding to know if the creature had any grasp of the value of a life. The snake demon merely cackled in response, tapping her forehead with a malicious grin as a realization dawned on her, leaving Dia caught off guard. She pointedly remarked that for all its overwhelming defensive strength, Dia's oversized shield possessed no offensive mystic power whatsoever. Pressing her advantage, the demon sneered that what she had assumed was a clever stalling tactic was actually the absolute limit of Dia's capabilities. Although impressed that the shield could negate her fluid poison, she noted that allowing an enemy behind the guard was a fatal error, just as a sudden movement stirred behind Dia. As residual venom began to intensely burn into Jia's side, the serpent gaily pointed out that raw defense was useless once contact had already been made. Exploiting Jia's moment of agony, she unleashed a massive, swirling torrent of corrosive acid directly at her vulnerable opponent, intending to burn her to ashes. Overpowering Jia's focus, the monster mocked her high-minded speech, declaring that a life without power or purpose carried no meaning at all. Looking across the smoke and devastation, she coldly mused that her dead subordinates were content with their fate, leaving Dia overwhelmed in the burning haze. She mocked Dia relentlessly, claiming that without mystic power, all the girl could do was attempt to block, and failing even at that. Dia gritted her teeth, refusing to break under the taunts while corrosive venom bubbled nearby. Undeterred by the insult, Dia lunged forward in a desperate dash, unleashing a flurry of strikes. The serpent demon effortlessly parried and slipped past every blow, pitying the young hero Rust for having such a useless ally. A heavy boom echoed across the battlefield as Jia struck with all her strength, but the demon remained entirely unscathed behind her defensive barrier, laughing off the attempt as a foolish effort that could not even itch her hide. The shockwave of her own failed attack sent Jia staggering back. She collapsed to her knees, wheezing heavily as physical exhaustion began to take its toll. However, the desperate assault had achieved one tiny result. A faint smudge of dirt now stained the demon's cheek. Enraged beyond reason by the minor blemish on her face, the serpent beast shrieked hysterically in vanity and fury. Floating into the air, the beast gathered toxic energy above her hands to cast her deadly technique, Venomelt, screaming that after annihilating Jia, Rust would be her next victim. The lethal sphere of corrosive magic ruptured forward in a blast of toxic needles and acid, crushing through Jia's guard and tearing into her flesh. As Jia lay coughing blood on the scorched earth, Onyx observed the bloody scene from afar, wondering aloud if Rust possessed poison resistance while noting with cold intrigue that the girl somehow still clung to life. Every nerve in Jia's body screamed in agony. The residual venom burned intensely from within, threatening to consume what little vitality she had left. Through tears and fading consciousness, Jia remembered how Rust constantly braved deadly perils to shield everyone. Overwhelmed by her own perceived weakness and reliance on him, she questioned why she had striven to fight at all. She drifted into a fading memory of her childhood, recalling how her mother had gently comforted her when she cried over being teased, asking what kind of weapon she hoped to possess when she grew up. Continuing the recollection, her younger self had raised her arms with innocent enthusiasm, declaring that she wanted a massive barrier, leaving her mother amused by such a vague yet earnest request. She had explained that because she disliked fighting, having a giant shield would allow her to protect everyone she cared about, earning a warm, understanding nod from her mother. Her mother's comforting words echoed through time, promising that her future companions would be deeply grateful to have her by their side. A sharp, emotional contrast to her present, battered body trembling on the cold ground. As the monstrous serpent mocked her feebleness and doubted her ability to stand, the warm memory of her mother rekindled a fierce resolve within her heart, compelling her to push herself up despite the searing pain. Ignoring the demon's cruel taunts as another corrosive spell gathered in the air, she stood firm, fixing her heart on a single unshakable purpose: to shield her allies at all costs. The dark sphere of toxic magic surged forward with terrifying velocity, hurtling straight toward her defensive barrier. In that pivotal instant, she remembered the clear trust established with her partner. He would be the blade that strikes down the monsters, so long as she remained the unbreakable shield that stands before him. Recalling his unwavering proclamation of her strength, all residual self-doubt vanished from her eyes. Awakening the true magic of her armaments, she activated Mirror Shield, channeling a brilliant wave of radiant light that completely deflected the toxic spell back toward the stunned demon. Her eyes blazing with fierce resolve, she shouted a defiant declaration that no harm would ever come to her companion while she drew breath. Driven back by the absolute force of her shield, the reflected strike detonated violently against the serpent demon's chest, tearing through her scales and showering the battlefield in her own caustic venom. As the monstrous creature collapsed in agony under the corrosive sting of her own toxic brew, the young warrior planted her massive shield, realizing her true purpose was not merely searching for her lost parents, but serving as the unyielding guardian at her allies' side. Pushing herself far past her physical limits, Jia desperately clung to her heavy shield as toxic fumes etched into its surface, whispering a plea for her strength to hold out just a little longer. She dragged the cumbersome barrier across the scorched earth, gritting her teeth as she vowed to protect Rust and Citron no matter the cost. Her body finally gave out under the overwhelming exhaustion, and she collapsed head first onto the barren ground, her faint promises fading into silence. After regaining enough strength to drag her shield across the desolate wasteland, she suddenly froze, her eyes widening in alarm as she stumbled upon a shadowy cave entrance embedded in the hillside. Meanwhile, amidst the chaos of combat, Rust charged forward with a furious war cry, clashing blades directly against his menacing opponent, who answered with dark, manic laughter. Their weapons met in a blinding flurry of sparks and metallic rings, the demonic warrior gleefully praising the quality of the young man's mystic arms amid the unrelenting exchange. Decoupling from the clash, the horn-headed adversary swept through the air and declared his legendary identity as the Great Onyx, one of the 7 great demons. He reeled back from the forceful wind of the demon's reveal, breathing heavily before shouting his own name back in defiance, proudly identifying himself as Rust Stone. He recalled ancient historical texts detailing the Great War 300 years ago, realizing with sudden dread that his opponent was one of the Demon Lord's legendary top generals who had somehow survived through the centuries. His formidable enemy merely stretched his arms in amusement, taunting the boy by questioning if he possessed greater strength than the ancient hero who had severed his right arm long ago. He smirked as he recalled his duel against the legendary warrior during the Great War, a battle that had cost him his right arm, leaving the young hero stunned by the reveal. In that distant memory, the fierce clash erupted into dark energy as the ancient hero's sword severed his limb in a desperate bid for victory. He went on to reveal how he had sought out the hero for a rematch, only to discover the man had already died of old age, leaving him completely unimpressed by talk of any new champion. Refusing to yield, Rust remembered all those counting on him to protect them and channeled his determination, enchanting his blade with blazing hellfire. With a fierce roar, he launched into a whirlwind assault, sending arc after arc of flaming slash attacks directly toward the Demon Lord's general. The explosive barrage engulfed the area in lightning and flames, forcing Rust to leap back as thick smoke enveloped his opponent. Watching from behind, the stunned companions cheered in amazement, daring to believe that the boy possessed enough power to actually vanquish Onyx. However, as the dust cleared, the Dark General merely laughed in delight, unharmed and taunting that he would offer applause if he only had 2 hands. He casually brushed off the fierce onslaught as a warm-up and declared it was time to take the fight seriously, freezing Rust in complete disbelief. Surrounding himself with a terrifying death curse enchantment, he readied his true magic while the young hero realized in horror that his opponent didn't have a single scratch. He unleashed a devastating blast of dark magic that tore across the battlefield, carving a jagged scar through the earth and throwing up clouds of debris. Taking to the sky, the Dark Lord nonchalantly announced that he was off to have some fun with the hero, commanding that his injured arm be healed by the time he returned, leaving the young woman frozen in shock. Before flying away, he cast a chilling gaze back over his shoulder, warning that if anyone dared to resist again, he would slaughter every single person present. As the vibrations of his immense power continued to shake the earth, a lone girl lay collapsed and unconscious amidst the smoking ruins. Through the settling dust and ongoing tremors, a faint groan echoed as Rust struggled to drag himself up from the ground. Battered and bleeding, he grimly realized the truth. The Demon General had not even been taking him seriously, possessing a terrifying durability that set him completely apart. Sparks of magical recoil zapped across his aching body, making him hesitate as he pondered whether attempting a dual enchantment in his shattered condition would cause his powers to rage uncontrollably. Above him, the villain erupted into a manic laugh, mocking the failure of his opponent's fire and dark spells while demanding that he unleash every last bit of his strength. Desperate to help, Jia resolved to head back out to the battle, even as the fearful townsfolk around her begged her to flee to safety alongside them. Refusing to turn and run any longer, Rust took a deep, steadying breath, gripped his dark-infused blade, and prepared to activate his ultimate technique. He crumpled in sheer agony, a piercing scream tearing from his throat as the insidious magic tore through his body. Observing his agony, the demon pointed out with smug satisfaction that while the boy's mystic arms were dampening the effect, the curse of his great deadened was meant to cause instant death. He mocked the young warrior's desperate struggle to stay upright, laughing callously as he taunted him not to let a mere curse finish him off. Accelerating in a blinding flash, the dark attacker lunged forward, launching a ferocious barrage of strikes before the weakened youth could even react. The relentless impact blasted him across the shattered ground, completely overwhelming his attempt to defend himself. Struggling to stay conscious on his hands and knees, he trembled uncontrollably, bewildered by how easily his guard had been shattered by the enemy's crushing power. Hearing Jia scream his name in sheer panic, he felt his vision blur, wondering if the severe gap in their abilities alongside the curse would force him into unconsciousness. Without giving him a second to breathe, Onyx charged in again, mockingly demanding that his opponent hurry up and fight with everything he had. Unable to watch him suffer any longer, Jia's eyes widened with fury, and she unleashed a fierce cry as she rushed to intervene. Diving straight into the trajectory of the strike, she thrust herself between them, taking the brunt of the force to shield Rust from lethal harm. She looked back in horror at her fallen companion, her voice cracking with desperate apologies as she scrambled toward his limp body. Kneeling beside him on the blood-stained earth, Jia broke into tears, overwhelmed by guilt as she blamed herself for his horrific state. Suddenly, Citron rushed to their side, her face flooded with a sudden ray of hope upon realizing Rust was still breathing, eager to use her magic to save him. Rust stretched out his hand in panic, trying desperately to invoke his magic to heal his own wounds, only to be met with complete silence as the curse completely suppressed his spells. Heavy, menacing footsteps echoed across the battlefield as Onyx loomed over them, addressing Citron with cold contempt for wasting his mercy. Onyx erupted into cruel laughter, mockingly asking why the frail girl had not fled in terror like she had in the past. Though terrified, Citron stood her ground and denounced him as a monster, but Onyx merely dismissed her bravery with a ruthless command for her to drop dead. With a swift, deadly swing, Onyx unleashed his blade to strike down the defenseless girl, but a sudden impact deflected his murderous blow. Panting heavily and severely bruised, Jia collapsed onto her knees after intervening, drawing Onyx's surprised gaze as he questioned who this new challenger was. She bellowed with furious defiance against Onyx for daring to harm her friends, ignoring her own severe injuries, while Onyx merely mocked her intrusion and a helpless Rust watched in horror. As she watched in horror, Onyx looked down on her fallen companion with sneering disappointment, mocking Rust for failing to live up to his expectations. Declaring that death would wait for him last, the ruthless demon promised to force Rust to watch as he butchered his friends first. Desperate and bleeding on the dirt, the young warrior reached out with a trembling hand, pleading helplessly as Onyx turned his sights toward the defenseless girls. Across the clearing, Jia and Citron shared a bittersweet smile, facing their impending demise with quiet resignation. Refusing to accept their fate, an agonizing scream tore from Rust's throat as he clawed at the earth, his soul rejecting total defeat. Grasping the hilt of his weapon embedded in the soil, he prayed with every fiber of his being, calling upon his trusted partner for the strength to alter fate. As Onyx brought his sword down in a lethal strike aimed at the girls, Rust desperately begged his weapon for power to protect his companions and crush the demon. Before the deadly blade could make contact, an explosive aura erupted behind Onyx, forcing the demon lord to halt his attack in shock. Channeling an immense surge of mysterious magical force, Rust unleashed a double enchantment, rising to his feet shrouded in radiant, roaring energy. Unleashing a surge of raw magic, Rust invoked a dual enchant spell with a fierce cry. Onyx only cackled in delight, questioning if the young warrior had been holding back his true power all along, while Jia and Citron looked on in utter disbelief. Seizing the initiative, the Dark Lord launched his deadly death curse directly at his advancing opponent, black magic swirling wildly across the battlefield. With a deafening battle cry, the young hero poured everything into his strike, clashing head-on with the oppressive dark wave in a blinding burst of power. The violent collision triggered an explosion that ripped through the terrain, forcing Jia to raise her protective barrier to shield Citron from the flying debris and shockwaves. Anxious for her ally, she panicked as she recalled Rust's past attempt to combine Chaos Bolt and Hellflame. That previous fusion had violently imploded upon him, leaving her to desperately wonder if he could truly master the dual enchantment this time without destroying himself. Through the cloud of smoke and debris, the bold warrior pushed forward into a fierce flurry of blows, his enchanted weapon repeatedly clashing against Onyx's relentless strikes in a frantic display of speed. Another earth-shattering impact shattered the ground beneath their feet, sending shockwaves through the air as neither combatant was willing to yield an inch. Driving his foe back with a heavy strike, Onyx burst into maniacal laughter, mocking the young boy's motives while thoroughly enjoying the adrenaline of a true challenge. Refusing to succumb to the pressure, he proclaimed his unyielding dream, that he became an adventurer to become a hero who would put an end to all fighting. The unwavering absolute resolve in his voice caught Onyx off guard, momentarily stunning the demon lord. Recovering instantly from his shock, the formidable demon lord retaliated with brutal precision, slicing deep and drawing blood as the young fighter lost his footing. He let out a dark, mocking laugh, realizing his opponent had hesitated at the crucial moment. Mocking the young hero's failure to strike, the demon stood tall, goading him as he spat blood onto the earth. The dark warlord continued his boisterous taunts, pointing out that one of the 7 great demons lay vulnerable before him, yet the boy could not deliver the final blow. He mocked the young warrior's lofty dreams of heroism, taunting him for missing what might be his only chance at victory. Rust's eyes widened in intense strain, sweat and blood running down his face as he struggled to draw breath. Watching the battle unfold from behind her barrier, Jia gasped in utter disbelief, unable to comprehend whether the young hero was actually pushing the formidable demon to his limits. Her disbelief quickly turned to terror as she noticed him swaying unsteadily on his feet. Clutching his chest in agony, he wobbled, his body visibly failing him as pain surged through his frame. Onyx grinned maliciously at the sight, noting that the lethal curse had finally begun to gnaw away at his rival from the inside. He gloated over the unfortunate turn of events, watching with cruel satisfaction as the curse sapped the boy's strength. A tremendous roar reverberated through the air as residual hell flames surged, engulfing the battlefield in a devastating blast of thermal fury. As the violent inferno subsided, Rust gripped his head, groaning through the piercing pain that racked his senses while smoke drifted across the shattered terrain. He grimly came to terms with his dire situation, realizing that his broken body and the insidious curse had pushed him to his absolute limit, and any prolonged conflict would prove fatal. Looking on with wide, trembling eyes as the demon's laughter echoed across the wasteland, Rust dropped to his knees, utterly awed and terrified by the overwhelming, monstrous power of one of the 7 great demons. He could only watch in terror as his dark adversary threw back his head in roaring laughter, mocking the foolish belief that a warrior of his stature could be brought down so easily. Shock paralyzed the young warrior. He had landed a direct, severe blow with hellish flames, yet the demon stood before him virtually unbothered. As the fiend mockingly asked if that was all he had, terror gripped the young barrier mage. She rushed forward, realizing with growing dread that their foe seemed truly invincible. Desperate to preserve life, she screamed at Citron to run as far as possible, overriding the smaller girl's hesitation by shouting that staying meant certain death for everyone. Tears streaming down her face, the petite girl sprinted away as instructed, carrying with her the desperate plea to find help for her brother. Watching her retreat, the battered youth bowed his head in silent agony, apologizing inwardly and praying for her safety. Self-doubt temporarily consumed the barrier mage, but her wounded companion stepped up, telling her to fall back as well and leave the fight to him. Instead of obeying, she turned with fierce indignation, throwing his own noble vows to protect others right back into his face. Wiping away her tears, absolute conviction filled her eyes as she swore to shield him to the end, reminding him that he could not die before finding his parents. Channeling all her magical power, she unleashed a mighty defensive barrier to intercept the danger, leaving the exhausted warrior wide-eyed in astonishment at her bravery. She stood unflinching in the path of destruction, causing Rust to roar out in agony and frustration as he watched her shield the group from certain death. As Citron fled across the desolate ground, memories of past helplessness rushed through her mind. Refusing to be the sole survivor ever again, she vowed to find a way to save both Rust and Jia. Hearing a rough voice shout out to her, she hastily wiped away her tears and paused, looking back in complete bewilderment. A wounded ally hobbled toward her, calling out to ask why she was still in the danger zone and explaining that he could not simply abandon a young girl without offering aid. Producing a small elixir bottle, the soldier insisted she take it, reasoning that her magical potential meant she could make far better use of the item than he ever could. Accepting the potion, she listened intently as he warned that its magic was severely limited, containing only enough energy to grant her a single spell. Suddenly, a brutal shockwave tore through the battlefield as the chaos reached a desperate boiling point. Covered in fresh blood and gasping for air, Rust erupted into a wild, hysterical laugh, declaring that now both he and Onyx were forced to fight with only a single good arm. Looming over him with dark energy, Onyx mockingly questioned what Rust could possibly achieve now, given that he had failed even when he had two functional arms. Ignoring Jia's panic as Onyx closed in, Rust launched himself forward in a desperate sprint, driven by the absolute conviction that one arm was still enough to cut down his foe. While he pressed his reckless assault, Citron clutched the single potion in her hands, paralyzed by fear and indecision, terrified that drawing any closer would only burden him further. As she hesitated, her eyes fell upon Jia lying collapsed and motionless on the dirt, prompting a desperate scream of her ally's name. The fallen warrior barely clung to consciousness, whimpering a faint promise through her tears while Citron watched in utter horror at how swiftly disaster had overtaken them. Resolving her heart, the young demon girl downed the magic potion as fierce metal clashes echoed through the air, suddenly realizing precisely what spell she needed to turn the tide. Meanwhile, her brother was pushed to his absolute limit, crying out in pain under a brutal barrage of strikes from his merciless opponent. Just as a lethal strike was about to crush him, a sudden surge of magical energy intervened, causing the boy to glance back in shock at Citron, who had used her soul spell to save him. The unexpected wave of power shattered the enemy's momentum, shocking the Dark Commanders as her magic enveloped her brother with renewed vitality. Leveraging the sudden distraction, he unleashed a fierce strike, roaring at his sister to flee the battlefield while the stunned enemy tried to regroup. With a violent clash and a burst of dust, the heavy exchange came to an abrupt halt as distance was created between the combatants. Standing amidst the clearing dust, the Dark Lord listened calmly to his subordinate's report, confident that no demon in the surrounding lands would dare aid the fleeing siblings against his absolute authority. He sneered in disbelief at the memory of the young demon begging humans for help, mockingly questioning how a genuine bond could ever form between mortal enemies. With a final sinister chuckle, his severe presence dissolved into ash and smoke, leaving behind only dust scattered in the wind. As the battlefield fell quiet, Diamond and Citron watched in hesitant disbelief before rushing toward Rust, who stood silently amidst the charred ruins of the earth. Without a word, he pulled both girls into a tight, protective embrace, trembling with profound relief that they had survived the brutal fight. Overwhelmed by the sudden safety, Citron broke down into violent sobs, admitting through her tears just how utterly terrified she had been throughout the entire ordeal. Her cries echoed across the desolate landscape, releasing all the suffocating panic she had harbored while held tightly in her companion's arms. Beside Rust's heavy blade planted firmly in the earth, the three stood together under the clearing sky, united and alive in the quiet dawn of their victory. Before the towering seat of government, an official listened attentively as a remarkable tale concluded, acknowledging that the request was fully understood. Though granting that such authority was strictly bound within the borders of this city for now, the official officially declared that Citron Treat's application for permanent citizenship was granted. Far from the grand halls of authority, the young hero slowly blinked open his heavy eyes, his consciousness returning after a long, deep slumber. Hearing him stir, the companion sitting by his bedside turned toward him with immediate relief in her eyes. Confused by his unfamiliar surroundings, he weakly inquired where they were, only for her to explain that they had arrived at Kreeland's medical facility. She recalled how the brave adventurers whom he had risked everything to protect during the battle had carried them both back to safety across the rugged terrain. Shocked by her reveal that 2 full days had passed, he bolted upright in panic, immediately questioning the safety and well-being of the young demon girl lying asleep beside his bed. The sudden commotion awakened the sleeping girl, who rubbed her eyes before gasping in joyful disbelief at seeing him awake at last. With a warm and gentle smile, he offered her a soft morning greeting, to which she responded with a radiant, heart-filled smile of absolute relief. As she stood beside the bed, an official in glasses examined Rust, assuring him that despite his severe injury, he had healed completely. Jia hovered close by, full of concern, asking if he felt any remaining pain. Patting Citron's head affectionately, he laughed softly as he realized the true reason behind his swift recovery, while Jia reminded him of how much the young demon had helped during his 2 days of bed rest. The official went on to praise Citron's extraordinary healing abilities, revealing that she had been granted permanent citizenship and offered a position to work at the facility, catching him completely off guard. Offering congratulations with a warm smile, he shared in her excitement, while Jia marveled at how quickly everything had been arranged thanks to the fellow adventurers who had spoken on Citron's behalf. Yet Citron hesitated, her voice full of worry as she questioned whether this was right, expressing anxiety that remaining behind meant she would no longer be there to heal his wounds during future travels. Reassuring her with a steady look, he reminded her that their primary goal had always been to secure a safe place for her to live, pointing out that traveling with adventurers would only put her in constant danger. Understanding the truth of his words, Citron quietly accepted her new reality, while Jia agreed softly that this was truly the best outcome they could have hoped for. Interrupting their conversation, the official reminded Rust to rest for the day before visiting the guild master tomorrow, before hurrying off to attend to other duties. As quiet settled over the room, Rust admitted feeling nervous about meeting the leader of the guild headquarters, though his companions urged him to focus on resting. Suddenly shifting his focus, he blurted out a question about their own health, reacting with alarm when they mentioned that Jia had sustained an injury to her back. Observing her carefully, he pointed out that while his own wounds had completely healed, the injury on her back must have been deep enough to leave a permanent mark. Flustered by his blunt request to see the scar, she blushed furiously and accused him of being a pervert, though he pressed on with earnest concern. Reluctantly slipping her garment down to expose her shoulder, she allowed him to see the jagged mark before asking if she could cover herself again, leaving him bowed in profound guilt. Trembling with remorse as he stared at his hands, he cursed his own weakness and swore an oath to become powerful enough to protect her from ever suffering again. Reaching out gently, she reminded him that he had been protecting her from the very day they met, reassuring him that he had no reason to shoulder such guilt. She explained that the scar was a testament to her own vow to protect him, prompting him to silently acknowledge how far they had come together on their journey. With a radiant smile, she proudly proclaimed herself to be the hero's shield, sending him into a fit of dramatic disbelief when he realized the guild master had bestowed the heroic title upon her instead of him. Meanwhile, in the bustling streets of White London, daily life had returned to normal, and Citron rested her chin in her hands, smiling in quiet content. Elsewhere in the city, an overly energetic swordsman unsheathed his blade with a flourish, celebrating the end of his probation and eager to plunge back into action despite his companion's exasperation. Striding confidently down the stone path with his sword over his shoulder, he blithely ignored his friend's attempts to calm him down as they walked through the city streets. He was met with immediate chaos from his companions as one leapt up in loud protest while another chuckled at the squabbling. Reminding them sternly that as teammates they shared responsibility, the young swordsman tried to keep their focus on accepting a new request as quickly as possible. While his group debated whether to head elsewhere for better merits and compensation, a specific word caught his attention. Overhearing someone nearby mention an altar, he froze, his sharp eyes narrowing as his interest was instantly piqued. Stepping closer to eavesdrop on the hushed conversation in the corridor, he listened intently as bystanders whispered about the guild keeping the destruction of an altar absolute secret. The mention that the hero party was involved sent a jolt of intense determination through him. Spurred by this revelation, he immediately turned away from his own party to confront the speakers. The two young adventurers turned in shock as he stalked toward them, demanding their attention. Closing the distance in an instant, he loomed over the pair with a dark, terrifying aura radiating around him. Ignoring their startled inquiries, he shouted fiercely, demanding to know the exact location of the altar they were speaking of. Meanwhile, far from the city in the vicinity of Creeland, a very different battle was underway. A pair of twin spellcasters faced down a massive, grotesque monster, coordinating their dual scythe enchantments of crimson blood and icy blue mana to strike the beast with an explosive burst. As the creature reeled from the attack, the twins signaled for their leader to finish it. Grinning with absolute confidence, The tall red-haired mage channeled a colossal surge of purple lightning and concentrated mana into her hands. With a dramatic spell release, she unleashed the full fury of her power directly onto the monster. The blast vaporized the giant beast in a blinding flash, leaving her to casually remark on how weak the opponent had been. Following the quick victory, the twin sisters caught up to her as the dust settled. They discussed how coming directly to Kreeland had proven far more productive than staying in Whiteland, where only novice contracts were available. Despite their successful hunt, the younger twins could not resist teasing their senior, calling her an idiot. Blushing in intense embarrassment, the red-haired mage flusteredly yelled back that her presence here had nothing to do with learning that Dia would be nearby. She discussed her concerns with her companions, admitting that leaving Dia alone in Rust's company was indeed a worrisome prospect. As they walked, the twins reflected on their recent rescue, reminding her that Rust had ultimately saved their lives and earned their profound gratitude. Before their friendly debate over Rust could continue, a voice interjected, halting their stroll right outside the majestic hall. 3 uniformed guild attendants approached them, politely interrupting their plan to report their completed quest. The lead staff member explained that before anything else, the guild master requested an immediate private audience with Lilac. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, Rust stretched out after his exertion, feeling relieved and preparing to head toward the guild headquarters himself. He had just escorted Citron to safety, where the caretakers thanked him for his service and asked him to wait while the young demon girl tidied herself up. Before Rust could fully digest their request, a small delegation of locals unexpectedly rushed up to him, shouting his full name in excitement. Caught off guard, the young warrior inquired who they were, only to be met with deep, formal bows as they declared their eternal gratitude for his heroic actions. Confused at first, Rust learned that one of them was a survivor he had saved during the terrifying clash with Onyx, and they expressed immense joy that Citron had finally been granted permanent citizenship thanks to the hero party's efforts. He offered a bright, warm smile, assuring the group that everything was taken care of and thanking them for waiting. Citron then proudly showed off her new maid-style uniform, twirling eagerly and asking how she looked, which earned immediate compliments from those around her. As the light-hearted chatter continued, Citron teased him about drawing unwanted attention, prompting him to defensively insist that no such thing would happen. She then launched into a long list of protective rules for her young demon friend, warning her not to cause trouble, trust strangers, or sleep unveiled, causing him to exasperatedly note that she had listed far more than just one promise. With the instructions finally finished, the time came for their farewells as Citron waved goodbye, promising they would visit again soon while wishing her a safe journey. Watching him step forward with unshakable optimism, Dia silently marveled at his character, realizing that the people of this realm would remember him for generations to come as a true hero. Her mind drifted back to his selfless words, recalling how he had reached out to her despite her demonic origins, steadfast in his belief that anyone in need deserved a helping hand. Tears gathered in her eyes as the memory of his gentle assertion echoed in her heart, reminding her that she was not a monster to be feared, but a cherished friend. Overwhelmed by emotion, she turned around and sprinted back toward them, shouting their names into the open air as fast as her legs could carry her. Reaching them with tears streaming down her face, she bowed deeply in heartfelt gratitude, thanking them with all her soul for everything they had done. Far away from the peaceful departure, dark voices sneered in a shadowed lair, mocking the news of Onyx's defeat and belittling him as the weakest among the 7 generals. However, a mysterious figure with light hair tilted their head thoughtfully, quietly musing that they had always considered Onyx to be the strongest of them all. He admitted that while he did not know the name of Onyx's slayer, the young warrior possessed remarkable skill. Beside him, his impish companion chided the topic lightly, questioning who could have slain their comrade and mocking Onyx's past prowess. As he recalled that the boy carried a distinct rusty sword, a sharp grin spread across the female general's face. With a swift movement, she locked onto this vital clue, declaring with sinister glee that she would never forget that detail as she targeted her new. In the bustling market square, a cheerful shopkeeper bowed deeply to express her gratitude, calling out after her customer. Having taken full advantage of a massive clearance sale, She held up armfuls of discounted recovery potions with a proud smile. Walking alongside his companion down the stone-paved street, the young warrior remarked on the rare spending spree, admitting he hadn't had much chance to use such items lately, but had perhaps gone a bit overboard with the bargains. Nearby, a pair of local children ran past, gleefully shouting about ice cream and calling out thanks to an older brother figure. Watching their bright innocence brought a gentle, thoughtful look to his eyes as he paused in the middle of the street. Rejoining him with a massive stack of supplies balanced in her arms, the young woman teased him about carrying so many bags before gently asking if he was still feeling anxious about Citron's departure. Gazing down at a small glass bottle in his palm, he acknowledged that Citron had endured a difficult and unfair life until now, but expressed firm confidence that her future would be bright and free from worry. His expression softened as he silently reflected on how difficult it was to get used to people leaving after becoming accustomed to their constant presence, while she stood close, offering an understanding and comforting gaze. Shaking off his lingering melancholy with a faint smile, he proposed that they head out, taking his first steps forward. Behind him, she softly declared that she would remain by his side forever. Hearing her quiet murmur, he paused in his tracks and turned back around with a wide-eyed, startled expression, asking if she had just said something. She simply met his gaze with a faint flush across her cheeks and a tender, glowing smile, choosing to keep her silent vow close to her heart. She chuckled softly to herself, brushing off her tender sentiments as they stood before the guild headquarters, where a grand banner emblazoned with a crest fluttered proudly in the breeze. Marveling at the imposing structure before them, Rust remarked that they had finally reached their destination, prompting Jia to nod eagerly as he motioned for them to step inside. Pushing open the massive wooden entrance doors, Rust called out a polite greeting, stepping cautiously into the quiet building with Jia close behind. Inside the breathtaking, pillar-lined grand hall, a solitary figure completely shrouded in a dark, flowing cloak walked silently toward them down the central walkway. Offering a bright, friendly smile, Rust innocently asked if the stranger was the guild receptionist, but was met with a sinister, unsettling silence beneath the shadow of the hood. Without a word of warning, the cloaked figure lunged forward with explosive speed, casting aside their cloak and catching both companions completely off guard. The unknown assailant launched a furious barrage of rapid slashes, forcing Rust back as Jia cried out in shock at the sudden, violent ambush. Spinning fluidly through the air, the attacker hurled circular bladed weapons directly at Rust's throat, prompting a frantic scream of terror from Jia. Narrowly dodging the lethal projectiles, Rust stood firm and urged the mysterious assailant to halt their attack, warning them that neither their blade nor those weapons were divine artifacts, and that continuing would only end in their own injury. As the dust began to settle, Jia looked back with lingering uncertainty, struggling to read the intentions of the mysterious figures standing before them. Sensing no immediate hostility, she hesitated, wondering what motive drove their strange approach. Before anyone could react, a sudden burst of purple lightning crackled through the air, striking Rust directly. He writhed under the shock as Jia gasped in pure astonishment at the unexpected display of high-tier magic. Smoking from the intense shockwave, Rust coughed up a cloud of soot, bewildered by who could have launched such a targeted strike. From the shadows ahead, a boisterous voice called out, warmly welcoming the group for a job well done. Standing at the head of the chamber, Guildmaster Gibeon's cigarette greeted them with a confident grin, formally receiving the returning party. Lilac calmly reported that their assignment had been completed without major complications. Determined to get answers, Jia stepped forward into the grand hall of the guild headquarters, demanding a full explanation regarding the recent events involving Amethyst and Garnet. Leaning back with a cigar between his fingers, Gibeon revealed that word had already spread about a lone adventurer vanquishing one of the 7 great demons, a feat that had left the high ranks thoroughly astonished. As Rust and Jia listened intently, Lilac added that reports of the ambush had reached Whitelawn, prompting the guild leadership to investigate the matter personally. Gibeon pointed out how difficult it was to believe that a novice could overthrow such a legendary demon, explaining that testing their strength firsthand had been necessary to verify the truth. Still rubbing his charred cheeks, Rust grumbled over being used as a target for testing, though the light-hearted mood quickly shifted as Gibeon announced it was time to address the true purpose of their gathering. With a grave expression, Gibeon drew a dark, ancient sword and placed it onto the table before them, revealing it to be the sacred artifact of Onyx himself. Rust and Jia froze in shock, staring wide-eyed at the formidable relic. He announced to Rust Stone and Jia Diamond that, in recognition of their extraordinary feat in destroying one of the 7 demon generals, they were being granted an extraordinary double-rank promotion. The guild's ancient chronicles matched the remnants of Onyx's power with the historical records from the Great War against the Demon King's army, confirming the undeniable truth of their triumph. Gazing upon the authentic sacred weapon recovered from the fallen general, the guild master expressed profound gratitude on behalf of all adventurers for their heroic deed. With energetic joy, the guild assistant formally declared their immediate elevation straight to gold rank, leaving Jia flustered and utterly stunned by the sudden leap. While others would have celebrated, the boy stared downward in quiet hesitation, troubled by receiving a special promotion without passing standard guild examinations like everyone else. Noticing his reluctant expression, the assistant remarked how rare it was for young adventurers to mirror the legendary heroes of old who selflessly sacrificed for others. The guild master smiled warmly, affirming that placing the protection of everyone's smiles above personal gain was the true mark of a genuine hero straight out of legend. Turning to their next official duty, he presented them with a high-priority assignment commissioned directly by guild headquarters to locate and destroy the altar of the evil god. Meanwhile, high in a frozen mountain pass, Helio pressed forward through a fierce blizzard while his comrades called out, struggling to maintain his relentless pace. As his party members questioned his frustration over destroying the altar, he yelled back into the howling wind that completing a task meant nothing unless it was an official request entrusted to them. He stood firm against the biting cold, unyielding even as their shivering companion pleaded for them to stop arguing and seek shelter from the storm. Lilac forcefully warned that taking on a quest meant for the renowned heroes was far too dangerous, but he merely replied with quiet resolve that its extreme danger was the exact reason he had to go. Flashbacks of childhood memories flooded his mind, recalling the widening gulf between them and the coveted title of the hero's right hand. Back then, a heated argument had erupted as Jia demanded the return of a stolen book, only to be met with his angry outburst. The young Rust had wept bitterly, declaring through his tears that he would surely become a true hero one day. That relentless determination had only fueled Helio's frustration, pushing him to scream in agitation for Rust to shut up. He could never forget how Jia had never once acknowledged him in the same way, bestowing all her faith upon Rust instead, who possessed the mightiest divine weapon of all. Even as other children praised his achievement of reaching B rank, they still begged to be paired with Rust instead, making him grit his teeth in silent humiliation. Later, when harsh judgments were passed stating that Rust was unfit to be an adventurer, Helio had quietly watched from afar as his rival walked away into the distance. In his eyes, Rust had brought this fate upon himself by failing to protect anything or achieve anything on his own, leaving him to watch the lone figure part ways with the group. Yet what tormented him most was Rust's gentle smile despite all the hardship, holding his weapon without a hint of resentment, leaving Helio to wonder why he wasn't consumed by anger. Driven by those bitter memories, he raised his weapon high in the present, fiercely declaring before his companions that he would surpass both heroes and legends alike. As they walked together, his dark-haired companion sternly questioned whether he was reflecting on his past actions, warning him that his reckless behavior was going too far. Fueled by sudden rage, he grabbed his companion tightly by the collar, snarling through clenched teeth and warning him not to spout such utter nonsense. His knuckles whitened as he gripped his ally's tunic, his voice trembling with unbridled rage. His companions pleaded with him to calm down, pointing out how drastically his behavior had shifted ever since reading the news about the hero's right-hand man. Refusing to hear another word, he screamed at them to shut their mouths, unable to endure their prying any longer. Before the heated argument could escalate any further, an eerie, high-pitched voice echoed across the snowy field, wondering aloud how to make everything quiet. The sudden interruption forced the trio to freeze in place, their eyes widening as two shadowy figures emerged in the distance. Instantly redirecting his pent-up frustration toward the new threat, the young swordsman drew his blade, dark magical energy surging around his weapon. He bellowed a vow to eradicate every single demon standing before them. Before he could strike, a violent pillar of scorching heat burst from the ground, scattering the group in panic. From behind the wall of flames stepped a fox-like demon woman, giggling maliciously as she summoned a crackling lance of thunder. Determined not to let the surprise attack break their formation, his companions readied their weapons and took a defensive stance. They urged him to pursue the fox demon while they took responsibility for handling the monstrous ram demon looming nearby. Taking their advice, he charged forward with lethal intent, his sword slashing through the air as he pursued the elusive foe. The fox demon leaped backward effortlessly across the snow, laughing mockingly as he barked at her to stop running and fight. Abruptly halting her retreat, the demon turned on her heel with a sly, playful wink, teasing that she rather favored earnest men before gesturing for him to come closer. Her sudden stop caught him off guard, making him freeze in confusion. A sudden, heavy silence made him glance back over his shoulder, only to feel his blood run cold. In the span of mere seconds, both of his allies had been struck down and lay unconscious in the snow, with the ram demon standing menacingly over them. The ram demon threw its head back with a manic, terrifying screech, celebrating how blissfully quiet the surroundings had finally become. The horrific sight pushed the young swordsman past his breaking point, his eyes widening in pure rage as he screamed a furious curse. Overwhelmed by disbelief and murderous fury, he glared up at the leaping beast, his voice raw with agony as he demanded to know what it had done to his companions. As he struggled to regain his footing, another massive presence crashed down with a booming laugh. A towering, tiger-visaged beast stood before him, joining the assault. Pinned to the snow, the young warrior could only grit his teeth as he realized yet another monster had appeared. The tiger demon sneered down at him, declaring that fragile humans should feel honored to become their feast. The three demons gathered around their fallen prey, discussing casually which human to devour first. As their cruel laughter echoed through the freezing air, the battered swordsman could do nothing but curse in helpless frustration. Inside his opulent office, Guildmaster Gibeon reclined behind his desk with a cigar between his teeth, while his attendant teasingly accused him of keeping secrets about the requested destruction of the altars. He chuckled softly in response, admitting that without concrete proof, there was little point in stirring up unconfirmed rumors. While she pondered the incredible news of the young hero felling one of the 7 demon lords before departing, he quietly reflected on the youth's relentless drive to forge ahead on his own 2 feet. Far from the guild hall, the young adventurer and his party trudged through a howling blizzard across a treacherous, snow-covered mountain range. Squinting through the whiteout conditions, he suddenly spotted a refuge ahead and pointed excitedly toward a small cabin tucked into the snowy hillside. Though his companion suggested taking a brief respite from the freezing storm, he remained resolute, insisting that they needed to push forward as quickly as possible based on the guildmaster's warning. Their sense of urgency was well-founded, as the dark, jagged altars bestowed by demon gods served as beacons that swarmed the surrounding regions with aggressive monsters until destroyed. Reiterating their goal, he explained that destroying the altar located in this area would guarantee the safety of the nearby villagers, prompting Lilac to tease him mercilessly about his dense and unromantic nature. Stunned by the unexpected mock, he lost his composure and blurted out a defense, only for Jia to suddenly step in, her face bright red as she shouted a flustered yet passionate defense of his virtues despite his obvious flaws. Watching the young girl's intense reaction, the older woman leaned in with a mischievous grin to advise her to keep her options open for the future, leaving the bewildered boy scratching his head in confusion. He brought his steps to a sudden halt amidst the howling wind, casting a sharp glance back over his shoulder. Noticeably startled by his abrupt pause, Jia turned to inquire what had caught his attention, her voice laced with confusion as calls echoed across the snowy trail. Continuing to strain his eyes against the blizzard, the young warrior mentioned hearing an unusual noise echoing from a distance. Jia tilted her head and strained her ears to listen, but admitted that she could hear nothing over the roar of the storm. Before she could finish her thought, a sharp crack of energy vibrated through the freezing air, signaling an abrupt shift in the atmosphere. Shocked by the sudden surge of magic, the group gasped in alarm as the unsettling force rippled across the terrain. A colossal bolt of lightning tore through the overcast sky, striking down into the nearby valley with an apocalyptic boom. The sheer impact shook the frozen earth, leaving the onlookers wide-eyed with horror as smoke billowed up from the crevasse. Sensing grave danger, the young swordsman turned to his companions with an expression of fierce determination, urging them forward as he voiced his grim intuition that something catastrophic was unfolding below. Down in the smoke-filled basin, the blast had devastated the battleground, felling massive demonic beasts whose bodies coughed up blood amidst the charred snow. As the enemy general mockingly commented on their terrible luck, a battered blonde warrior stood his ground, gasping heavily through his exhaustion. Gritting his teeth with burning indignation, the bruised swordsman glared relentlessly at his monstrous foes, declaring that their fate was sealed the moment they dared to challenge him. Even as the enemy demon reacted with startled disbelief to his unyielding spirit. Moments later, Rust's party crested the snow-covered ridge above the crater, their eyes catching sight of the smoke and the figures locked in conflict below. Spurring into action, the young leader urged everyone to hurry toward the fallen bodies scattered in the snow, only for his companions to warn him urgently that demons were present on the field. Reaching the scene of the strike, he stopped dead in his tracks as he recognized the blonde swordsman standing amidst the wreckage, both young men calling out each other's names in sheer disbelief at this unexpected reunion. He remembered the harsh moment he was cast out, mocked as useless by the party leader and his former companions. Accepting his banishment without protest, he secretly rejoiced at being freed from their burden, though he was left bewildered as to why the saintess had chosen to follow after him. As the fox demon woman teased them about calling for backup, Helio angrily declared that those two were his only true allies, stepping forward to shield Rust while demanding immediate medical attention for his friend. Suddenly, massive pillars of fiery energy erupted across the frozen peaks, leaving Lilac, Rust, and Diamond looking on in sheer disbelief as the snowy mountain dissolved into total chaos. Enraged by the sudden upheaval, the young swordsman scanned the barren tundra, shouting in frustration over the vanishing fox demon and the unknown whereabouts of the sheep demon's altar. When Lilac reached out to urge him against a reckless pursuit in such hazardous conditions, he harshly swatted her hand away, telling her to leave him alone. Unfazed by his outburst, she sternly reprimanded him, insisting that saving their injured companions was far more urgent than hunting down enemy monsters. Realizing the wisdom in her words, they agreed to fall back to the nearby shelter before the intensifying blizzard completely engulfed them. Walking silently alongside him through the deep snow, Rust offered words of comfort, though the proud warrior remained quiet, heavily weighed down by remorse. Back inside the warmth of the cabin, the group tended to their unconscious allies, growing deeply concerned as they discovered no visible wounds to explain why the victims would not awaken. As Rust questioned if a mysterious curse was at play, Lilac confirmed that if an affliction was indeed responsible, their only hope would be to locate and defeat the one who cast it. With night settling over the mountain and the storm raging outside, time was running dangerously short, for without restorative magic or remedies, delaying their response could prove fatal. Inside the warm shelter, Helio uncorked a glass vial and swallowed a bitter recovery potion, admitting with a weary sigh that he had bought far too many remedies beforehand. Taking a seat while resting his bandaged torso, he watched Jia Bao with sheepish relief, glad that her assistance had proved useful after all. She laughed nervously, recalling how awkward and hostile their initial meeting in the blizzard had been when he had sternly questioned who she was. Eager to break the awkward silence, she excused herself to go check on their comatose allies, but as she turned away, he quietly murmured her name in recognition. As night fell over the mountain cabin, he solemnly swore that he would repay his debt to them for tending to his injuries, leaving her momentarily stunned. Moments later, he slid open the wooden door and silently stepped out into the howling snow, setting off across the white expanse alone. Noticing his sudden departure, Rust called out into the icy gale, asking if he truly intended to head out into the danger all by himself to save their friends. Halting in the deep drifts, he turned around and gruffly told the boy to mind his own business and go back inside to sleep. Refusing to back down, the boy stepped forward and declared that they shared the very same goal, as the guildmaster had tasked them with destroying the altar as well. Absorbing this unexpected revelation, he realized that their destinies were intertwined, bound for the same perilous altar hidden in the mountains. He bristled in frustration as Rust firmly grabbed his arm, bitterly questioning why everyone insisted on sticking by his side when cooperation was offered. Lashing out in anger, the distressed warrior accused Rust of getting carried away, warning that he would inevitably abandon him just like Ruby Eye had, refusing to put any faith in someone he deemed weak. Gritting his teeth through bitter tears, he poured out his resentment over how Ruby Eye had cast them aside the moment he acquired a powerful divine treasure, prompting Rust to passionately challenge his deep-seated frustration. Standing under the cold moonlight, the gravity of Rust's words left him wide-eyed and speechless as the boy demanded to know if he wasn't infuriated by being discarded. Softening his posture, Rust offered a gentle smile and acknowledged that the pain stemmed from admiration rather than pure malice, helping ease the tension between them. Turning to trek onward into the snow alone, the swordsman was instantly pursued by Rust, who adamantly refused to let an injured ally wander off unaccompanied. As they walked side by side in the freezing night, Rust took full responsibility for his own missteps, admitting that his rash actions had dragged others into danger. Refusing to sit back and wait for morning while someone was in peril, Rust called out to his companion, asking if he still recalled the grand dream he held. Remembering Rust's aspiration to become like a storybook hero, the young warrior listened as Rust declared his absolute resolve to reach out a helping hand to anyone in need, including him. Outside the snow-covered mountain cabin, Rust assured Helio that leaving the others inside was safe since Jia was with them, while indoors, the young woman rested peacefully. Continuing their walk through the freezing landscape, Helio paused, calling out his companion's name with a heavy, serious look on his face. He barked a warning, telling his partner not to hold him back, but the young warrior merely offered a confident smirk in return, declaring that the same warning applied right back to him. Meanwhile, outside the snowy cabin, Lilac shouted in frustration at the empty landscape, calling men utter fools and demanding to know where those two had vanished to. Beside her, Jia puffed out her cheeks in a deep pout, furious that she had been left behind while calling her companion an absolute idiot. As the women continued to voice their annoyance over the boy's sudden departure, Lilac suggested they return inside out of the cold, wondering aloud if the remaining pair were still asleep inside the cabin. Unbeknownst to them, high above on the roof of the cabin sat the fox demon woman, gazing down at the group below as she mused about burning the entire place to ashes to grant them her blessing. She let out a soft, sinister chuckle, disappointed to notice that the powerful fighter known as the Thunderman was absent, making the impending ambush feel far too easy. Sensing the sudden overhead danger, one of the women shouted a desperate warning for everyone to get down and take cover. Before they could fully react, a massive bolt of violet lightning rained down from the sky, detonating directly upon the snowy campsite with devastating force. Snickering with dark delight, the fox demon mockingly flaunted her mastery over lightning, dismissing any real interest in battling women. Lilac gasped in shock as oppressive magical energy began to crackle around their dangerous new foe. Before the deadly bolt could strike her allies, the brave shielder leaped into action, throwing up her massive light barrier to intercept the blast. She gritted her teeth against the violent impact, shouting that she would never allow them to be hurt. The force of the collision echoed across the snowy slopes as the dark assault intensified. Taking charge amidst the chaos, Lilac shouted back toward the cabin, entrusting the safety of their two sleeping companions to Lapis and Spinel. Inside, Citron panicked, agonizing over what they should do in Rust's absence. But Lilac sharply cut her off, reminding her that as active adventurers, they were the only ones present capable of defending their fallen friends. Panting heavily from the intense strain, Jia pushed herself to the limit as the freezing wind whipped around her. The fox demon merely sighed at the display, expressing mild annoyance at such reckless bravado before sending another wave of destructive energy forward. Watching the self-sacrificing display, Lilac quietly muttered about her recklessness. Yet Dia's eyes blazed with unwavering resolve as she declared that protecting everyone was her absolute duty, regardless of the pain she suffered. Unable to stay silent, Lilac rounded on her with fierce conviction, demanding to know who would be left to protect her or rust if she threw her own life away in a martyr's struggle. The stark truth hit Dia like a physical blow, forcing her to realize that anyone incapable of protecting themselves could never hope to protect others, while the fox demon groaned in annoyance at their loud, emotional exchange. With a newfound clarity between them, Lilac voiced her complete trust in Dia's defense, declaring that she would now channel every ounce of her magic into a ruthless, full-power counterattack. Strengthened by the unwavering faith of her companions, cherished memories of words of encouragement flooded Dia's heart, banishing all remaining doubt from her spirit. She looked back at her ally with wide, uncertain eyes, asking softly if she would place her trust in her once more. With absolute conviction in her voice, her friend declared that her faith had never wavered, chuckling with supreme confidence as she asserted that together they were truly invincible. Observing their emotional reunion with cold disdain, the fox demon scoffed at their bond, asking callously if they were prepared to die now that their tearful farewells were finished. Ignoring the demon's taunts, Lilac channeled her gathering magical energy and called out to Dia, who readily affirmed her resolve as the longtime allies launched their combined counteroffensive.